The plaza fell silent as Kalen's voice cut through the sacred smoke. I reject you, Elira of no bloodline, as my destined mate. Gasps rippled through the gathered packs. The moon rite, a bond ordained by forces older than memory, had never been refused. Not once in 300 years. Elira stood frozen, the ceremonial mark still burning on her wrist. Around her, 1,000 eyes glittered with something between pity and satisfaction. Weak, Kalen continued, his golden eyes cold. Unworthy. A mistake the moon made that I will correct. He turned his back. The crowd roared approval, and Elira's world shattered. Boy, if you want to see how a rejected outcast becomes the most feared ruler in the borderlands, stay until the end. Drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from, and hit that like button. This story gets wild. The night had started with drums, deep rhythmic pulses that echoed across the stone amphitheater carved into Varkros's central plateau. Firelight danced against ancient walls, casting shadows that seemed alive, hungry. The air smelled of burning sage and pine resin, thick enough to choke on. Elira had barely been able to breathe since sunrise. They dressed her in ceremonial white, a gown that felt more like a shroud than celebration. The fabric hung wrong on her frame, too loose in some places, too tight in others. Nothing about this felt right. Nothing ever had when it came to pack traditions. Stop fidgeting, her Aunt Mira hissed, yanking at Elira's dark hair with practiced cruelty. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Elira bit her tongue. Harder for whom, she wanted to ask. But Mira had raised her after her parents died, and questioning authority in Varkros was dangerous. Especially for someone like Elira, someone whose wolf had never fully emerged, whose instincts ran quiet when they should roar. Weak. That's what they called her. What they'd always called her. The Alpha Heir will be watching, Mira continued, weaving silver thread through Elira's braids. Try not to embarrass the family. The moon has chosen you for reasons beyond our understanding, but that doesn't mean you should act like you deserve it. The moon had chosen her. That's what the seers claimed after the solstice divination 3 months ago. Elira's name had appeared in fire and ash, bound to Kalen's in letters that refused to fade. A mate bond sanctioned by the oldest magic their world knew. She still didn't believe it. Kalen was everything Varkros worshipped, brutal strength wrapped in aristocratic refinement. His wolf was massive, silver-white, dominant enough to make grown alphas drop their eyes. He'd led hunting parties since he was 16, brought down rogue packs threatening their borders, commanded respect with nothing but his presence. And Elira? She'd barely shifted a dozen times in her 21 years. Her wolf was small, hesitant, practically mute compared to the powerful beast that prowled Varkros's streets. She worked in the archives, cataloging old treaties and forgotten histories. She was invisible. Until the moon decided she wasn't. Done. Mira stepped back, surveying her work with the critical eye of someone inspecting livestock. You'll have to do. Remember, speak only when spoken to. Keep your eyes down. Don't touch him first. And for the love of the ancients, don't embarrass us. Elira nodded. Her reflection in the polished bronze mirror showed a stranger, pale skin painted with ceremonial marks, dark eyes too wide, hair adorned with silver she'd never afford otherwise. She looked terrified. Because she was. Asti? The amphitheater held 3,000 people when Elira finally emerged. She could feel every single pair of eyes on her as she descended the stone steps toward the central platform. Whispers followed like wolves tracking wounded prey. That's her? Doesn't look like much. The moon must have made a mistake. Kalen won't go through with it. He can't. Her hands trembled. She clasped them together, trying to remember the words Mira had drilled into her head. Protocol. Tradition. The sacred script of the moon rite that had bound mates for generations. The platform rose ahead, carved from a single piece of black stone worn smooth by centuries of ceremonies. Kalen already stood at its center, dressed in formal leathers that made him look even more imposing than usual. His golden eyes tracked her approach with the warmth of a winter storm. Behind him, the Council of Elders sat in silent judgment. To his left stood his father, Alpha Torven, whose expression suggested he'd swallowed something rotten. To his right, his mother Seraphine, beautiful and cold as glacier ice. None of them wanted this. Elira climbed the platform steps, each one feeling like a march toward execution. When she reached the top, the head elder, an ancient woman named Corvina, gestured for silence. The drums stopped. 3,000 people held their breath. "We gather under the full moon," Corvina intoned, her voice carrying across the amphitheater without effort, "to witness a bond written in the stars. Kalin, son of Torvin, heir to Varkros, step forward." Kalin moved like liquid violence, controlled and predatory. He stopped precisely 2 feet from Elira, close enough that she could smell cedar and smoke on his skin. "Elira, daughter of the archive lines, step forward." Elira's legs barely cooperated. She managed one step, then another, until she stood within arm's reach of the man who was supposed to be her destiny. He looked at her like she was dirt on his boot. "Present your wrists," Corvina commanded. This was it. The moment where ceremonial marks would be carved into their skin, binding them together with magic older than the pack itself. Permanent. Unbreakable. Elira extended her arms, wrists up. Her hands shook so badly she couldn't stop them. Kalin didn't move. The silence stretched. People shifted in their seats. Corvina's ancient eyes narrowed. "Alpha Air," she said quietly. "Present your wrists." "No." That single word detonated like thunder. Gasps erupted across the amphitheater. Elira's vision blurred at the edges. Had she heard him correctly? "No?" Corvina repeated, her voice dangerous despite its softness. Kalen's jaw tightened. He turned slightly, addressing the crowd rather than the elder. "I will not be bound to weakness. The moon has made an error, one I refuse to accept." "The moon does not err," Corvina said sharply. "The bond was revealed through sacred divination. It cannot be, it will be." Kalen's voice rose, commanding. "I am the heir to Varkros. I will lead this pack into an age of expansion and strength. I cannot do that shackled to someone who can barely shift, who contributes nothing, who would make us a laughingstock among the border territories." Each word landed like a physical blow. Elira's chest constricted. Around her, the world tilted sickeningly. "This is unprecedented," Alpha Torvin cut in, standing. His voice carried the weight of authority. "My son raises a valid concern. The pack's future cannot be compromised by outdated ritual when practical reality—" "Practical reality?" Corvina's eyes blazed. "You dare speak of reality when you stand on ground consecrated by the very forces you now dismiss? The moon rite has bound mates for 300 years without fail." "Then perhaps," Kalin said coldly, "it's time for that to change." He turned fully toward Elira now. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The ceremonial marks on her wrists burned like acid. "I, Kalin of Varkros, son of Torvin, and heir to the Alpha throne, reject you, Elira of no bloodline, as my destined mate. I sever this bond before it forms. I claim no attachment, no responsibility, no connection to you now or ever." The formal words of rejection, words that shouldn't exist, words that had never been spoken in this amphitheater's long history. Magic recoiled. The marks on Elira's wrists flared white-hot, then crumbled to ash. The pain was excruciating, like her bones were being hollowed out from the inside. She gasped, stumbling backward. No one caught her. "Furthermore," Kalin continued, his voice cutting through her agony, "I declare you exile. You are no longer pack, no longer kin, no longer welcome within Varkros borders. You have 1 hour to gather what you can carry, then you will be escorted to the frontier and released. If you return, you will be hunted as a rogue." "Kalin," Seraphine started, but her son silenced her with a look. "This is my right as heir," he said. "Challenge it if you dare." No one did. The crowd's shock had transformed into something uglier. Elira could see it in their faces. Relief. Satisfaction. Agreement. She was the weakness they'd always suspected, the flaw the moon had tried to force into their perfect hierarchy, and now she was being cut out. "Please." The word escaped before she could stop it. Elira hated the way it sounded. Small, broken, desperate. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't want—" "What you want," Kalin said, finally meeting her eyes directly, "is irrelevant. You are nothing. You have always been nothing, and I will not let your weakness define my reign." Something inside Elira cracked. Not her heart, that had already shattered. Something deeper, something she didn't have words for. She looked at Corvina, silently begging for intervention. But the ancient elder just shook her head slowly, grief etched in every line of her face. "The rejection has been spoken," Corvina said quietly. "The bond is severed. The exile is declared." She paused. "May the moon have mercy on us all for this blasphemy." Guards materialized from the shadows. Rough hands gripped Alira's arms, pulling her away from the platform. She didn't resist, couldn't. The crowd parted as they dragged her down the amphitheater steps. Faces blurred past. Some showing pity, most showing nothing at all. Mira wouldn't even look at her. They took her to the small room she'd called home, gave her exactly 1 hour as promised. She packed mechanically, spare clothes, a water skin, dried meat from her meager rations, a knife. The book of old histories she'd been reading, nothing else fit in her pack. When the guards returned, they led her through Varkros in silence, past the market square where she'd bought provisions, past the archive where she'd spent countless hours, past faces she'd known her entire life, all carefully blank. At the main gate, they stopped. Beyond it stretched the frontier, vast, wild, unforgiving. Miles of forest that grew darker and more dangerous the further you went. Territories claimed by rogue packs and worse things. Land that killed the unprepared. "Any last words?" one guard asked. He didn't sound cruel, just tired. Alira looked back at Varkros one final time. Somewhere in those stone buildings, Kalen was probably celebrating, relieved to be free of his weak, unwanted mate. "Tell him," she said quietly, "that he's going to regret this." The guard snorted. "Sure, kid. Good luck out there." They opened the gate, pushed her through, slammed it shut behind her. And just like that, Alira was alone. The first 3 days were the hardest. Not because of the cold, though that was brutal. Not because of hunger, though her rations ran out faster than expected. But because of the silence. Alira had lived her entire life surrounded by pack. Even as an outsider, she'd been part of something larger, bound by invisible threads of community and shared purpose. Now those threads were severed. The absence echoed in her bones like a phantom limb. She walked deeper into the frontier because going back meant death. Her wolf, small, pathetic thing that it was, refused to emerge. Too scared, too broken by the rejection. So she walked on human legs, stumbling over roots, tearing her clothes on thorns, making every stupid mistake someone raised in civilization would make. On the 4th day, it rained. Not a gentle shower, but a torrential downpour that turned the forest floor into a mudslide. Alira took shelter under an overhang, shivering in wet clothes that would never dry in this humidity. Her fire attempts failed repeatedly. The dried meat had molded. Her water skin was empty because she didn't know which streams were safe to drink from. She was going to die out here. The realization didn't come as a shock, more like resigned acknowledgement. Kalen had known exactly what he was doing. Exile to the frontier was execution with extra steps. "Stupid," she muttered, hugging her knees to her chest. "Should have seen it coming. Should have fought back. Should have—" What? What could she have done? She was exactly what they'd always said. Weak, powerless, insignificant. Thunder cracked overhead. Lightning illuminated the forest in stark white flashes. And in one of those flashes, Alira saw eyes. Yellow, hungry, moving closer. She scrambled to her feet, back pressed against the rock. Her hand found the knife, laughably small against whatever was out there. Her wolf cowered deeper inside, useless. Another flash of lightning revealed the predator, a night stalker. Massive, reptilian, with jaws that could crush bone. They were supposed to be rare this close to the border, drawn only by the scent of easy prey. Apparently she qualified. It circled slowly, sizing her up, intelligent enough to be patient, hungry enough to be determined. Alira's hand tightened on the knife. Every survival instinct she'd never developed screamed at her to run. But running triggered the chase, and she'd lose that race. "Come on then," she whispered. Her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "Let's get this over with." The night stalker lunged. Alira dove sideways, felt claws rake across her shoulder. Pain exploded white hot. She slashed wildly with the knife, felt it connect, heard the creature hiss. But it barely slowed. It hit her like a battering ram, slamming her into the mud. Jaws snapped inches from her face. She jammed her forearm into its mouth, felt teeth sink deep, screamed. This was it. This was how it ended. And something inside her, That thing that had cracked when Kaelin rejected her, finally broke completely. No! The word came from somewhere deep, somewhere primal. Not a scream, but a command, layered with harmonics that shouldn't exist in a human throat. The Night Stalker froze. Its jaws loosened, its eyes went glassy, confused. Elira's arm was still in its mouth, bleeding heavily, but the creature had stopped attacking, stopped moving, like something had reached into its predator brain and flipped a switch. Let go, her voice again. But wrong, layered, powerful. The Night Stalker released her arm and backed away, staggered, shook its head like trying to clear water from its ears, then turned and fled into the darkness. Gone. Elira lay in the mud, gasping. Her shoulder screamed. Her arm was shredded. Blood mixed with rainwater, turning the puddles around her pink. But she was alive. And something had changed. That voice. That power in her words. What the hell was that? She tried to stand, failed. Her vision swam. Blood loss, shock, the adrenaline crash hitting all at once. The last thing she saw before darkness took her was a figure emerging from the trees. Tall, hooded, moving toward her with purpose. Then nothing. Elira woke to warmth. She was lying on something soft. Furs, she realized groggily. A fire crackled nearby. The air smelled like herbs and smoke and something medicinal. Her shoulder and arm were bandaged, tight enough to hurt, but not enough to cut circulation. Someone had undressed her, cleaned her wounds, tended her. Someone had saved her life. "You're awake," the voice came from her left. Elira turned her head, wincing at the movement. An old woman sat by the fire, grinding something in a mortar with practiced efficiency. Her skin was weathered like tree bark, her hair white as frost, but her eyes, pale green, almost luminous, held fierce intelligence. "Where?" Elira's voice came out as a rasp. "My home, such as it is." The woman gestured around the small cave, which was furnished with surprising comfort. Shelves carved into rock, organized supplies, even a few books. "You're lucky I was hunting nearby when you had your little encounter with that Night Stalker." The Night Stalker. The attack. The voice. "What happened to it?" Elira asked. "Ran off like its tail was on fire." The old woman studied her with unsettling intensity. Strange behavior for a Night Stalker. They don't usually abandon prey mid-kill, almost like something scared it more than hunger. Elira's chest tightened. "I don't know what—" "Don't lie to me, girl. I'm too old for games." The woman set down her mortar and pestle, moving closer. "What did you do to that creature?" "Nothing. I told it to stop." "You told it?" The woman's expression shifted to something between curiosity and recognition, and it listened. "I don't understand what happened. My voice was different. Wrong." "Not wrong." The woman settled onto a stool, her movements careful. "Ancient. There's a difference." "What do you mean?" The old woman was silent for a long moment, studying Elira like she was a puzzle with missing pieces. "What's your name, girl?" "Elira?" "And you came from Varkros." Not a question. Elira nodded anyway. "Exiled." Again, not a question. "Recently, by the looks of you, still wearing ceremonial marks." She pointed to Elira's wrists, where faint scars remained from the burned bond marks. "How did you—" "I know a lot of things, including what those particular scars mean." The woman leaned back. "Rite rejection. Rare, usually fatal, actually. The magic backlash alone kills most people." "Lucky me," Elira muttered. "Luck has nothing to do with it." The old woman's eyes narrowed. "You survived because you're not what they think you are. What you think you are." "I'm weak. Everyone knows. You commanded a Night Stalker with your voice." The interruption was sharp. "That's not weakness. That's power most shifters will never touch in their entire lives." Elira's breath caught. "I don't understand." "No, you don't. Because Varkros has spent generations bearing the truth." The woman stood, moving to one of her carved shelves. She pulled down a leather-bound book, old enough that dust puffed from its cover. "Tell me, girl, what do you know about the first voices?" "The what?" "Of course they didn't teach you." The woman's laugh was bitter. "Why would they? Can't have the lower ranks knowing that dominance isn't the only kind of power." She opened the book, revealing pages covered in script so old Illyra could barely read it. The first voices were the original rulers, before alphas, before pack hierarchy. They commanded through will and word. Their voices carried the weight of ancient magic. They could calm storms, still violence, bend instinct itself. That's just mythology, Illyra whispered. Is it? The woman tapped her temple. You just stopped a killing machine mid-attack with nothing but words. Mythology doesn't do that. Illyra's mind reeled. But if first voices were real, why doesn't anyone— Because they were eliminated. The woman's voice went flat. 300 years ago, when the alpha hierarchies rose to power, the ruling families couldn't have their authority challenged by people who could command obedience without violence. So they hunted down every first voice lineage they could find, scattered them, destroyed their records, rewrote history to make dominance the only acceptable form of strength. They committed genocide. They called it progress. The woman's expression hardened. The few bloodlines that survived went into hiding, mixed with common lines, let their gifts go dormant rather than risk discovery. You think I'm— Illyra couldn't finish the sentence. I think the moon doesn't make mistakes. The old woman closed the book carefully. I think you were matched to that arrogant heir precisely because your bloodline needed to be awakened, and his rejection, painful as it was, cracked you open enough for the power to emerge. That's insane. You commanded a Night Stalker. Illyra had no response to that. My name, the woman said quietly, is Thorn. I'm the last of the Thornwood line, another family that supposedly died out centuries ago. And I've been waiting a very long time for someone like you to stumble into my woods. Why? Because the world needs balance. Thorn's pale eyes gleamed, and the alpha families have had unchecked power for far too long. They've grown arrogant, cruel. They exile people like you to die simply because you don't fit their narrow definition of strength. Kaelin's face flashed in Illyra's mind, his cold eyes, his cutting words. You are nothing. He was wrong about you, Thorn continued, reading her expression. And if you're willing to learn, I can help you prove it. Learn what? How to use that voice of yours. How to channel the power that's been sleeping in your blood for generations. Thorn smiled, sharp and dangerous. How to become something those pompous alphas will regret ever crossing. Illyra's heart pounded. Part of her wanted to refuse, to reject this insanity and find some quiet corner of the world to disappear into. But another part, the part that had been dismissed and mocked her entire life, whispered different words. Make them see. Make them regret. Make them pay. What do I have to do? She asked. Thorn's smile widened. First, heal. Your body needs time to recover from both the attack and the rejection trauma. And then we see exactly how powerful you can become. The training started 3 days later. Illyra's wounds had scabbed over, her fever had broken, and Thorn declared her fit enough to begin. What followed was the most grueling month of her life. The voice isn't magic, Thorn explained on the first morning, leading Illyra to a clearing ringed by ancient stones. It's will made audible, intent given form. You're not casting spells. You're imposing your reality onto the world around you. That sounds like magic. Semantics, Thorn waved dismissively. Try commanding that rock to move. Illyra stared at the stone in question, roughly the size of her head. Move. Nothing happened. You're asking, Thorn critiqued. Command. You're not requesting cooperation. You're telling reality to bend. That's not how physics works. Physics is just consensus reality. Break the consensus. Thorn demonstrated, her voice dropping into layered harmonics. Move. The rock rolled 3 feet to the left. Illyra gaped. Your turn, and this time mean it. It took 6 hours before Illyra could make the rock twitch. By the end of the first week, she could roll it consistently. By the end of the second, she could lift it briefly before her concentration shattered. But the physical exercises were nothing compared to the mental ones. You have to understand, Thorn said one night over dinner, that what we're doing goes against everything you were taught. Varkros raised you to believe submission was weakness, that following orders meant you were less. They trained you to feel small. I am small. No. Thorn's voice cracked like a whip. You were made small. There's a difference. Your wolf is quiet because you've spent 21 years learning to silence yourself. Your power is dormant because you've internalized their contempt. Do you understand? They broke you systematically. Illyra's hands trembled around her bowl. I don't know how to undo that. You start by getting angry. I am angry. No, you're hurt. There's a difference. Thorn leaned forward. Hurt makes you want to hide. Anger makes you want to fight back. You need to find that rage, girl, because gentle people don't survive what's coming. What was coming, Thorn refused to specify, but her urgency suggested time was limited. The training intensified. Illyra learned to modulate her voice, different tones for different effects. A low rumble could induce calm. A sharp spike could trigger fear. Layered harmonics could bypass rational thought entirely and speak directly to instinct. She practiced on animals first, convincing rabbits to approach, making birds change direction mid-flight. The night stalker that attacked her became a regular visitor, docile as a puppy whenever Illyra commanded it. You're getting stronger, Thorn observed one morning, watching Illyra direct an entire pack of wild dogs through a complex series of movements. Your control is improving. It still feels wrong, Illyra admitted, like I'm forcing them. You are. That's the point. Thorn's expression was unreadable. The difference between you and an alpha is that they force through dominance, threatening violence if you don't comply. You force through inevitability, making compliance the only logical option. It's subtler, more complete, and far more frightening to anyone who understands what you're doing. You make it sound evil. All power is neutral. It's the wielder who determines morality. Thorn paused. The question is, what do you plan to do with this? Illyra had been avoiding that question. I don't know. Liar. The accusation stung because it was accurate. Illyra knew exactly what she wanted, had known since the moment Kaelin's words severed their bond. She wanted revenge, not the hot, immediate kind that faded with time, but cold, calculated, complete. She wanted Kaelin to understand, truly understand, what he'd thrown away, what he'd lost. She wanted him to regret. There it is, Thorn said softly, watching her face. There's the anger I need you to hold on to. Anger doesn't feel productive. Anger is fuel. What matters is how you burn it. Thorn stood, brushing dirt from her worn trousers. Come, there's something you need to see. She led Illyra deep into the forest, past markers Illyra had learned meant stay away, past wards that made her skin prickle, into territory that felt old in ways that had nothing to do with time. They emerged in a grove where the trees grew in perfect circles. At its center stood a stone altar, covered in markings that seemed to shift when Illyra wasn't looking directly at them. This, Thorn said quietly, is a binding stone. One of 7 that used to anchor the First Voice territories. The Alphas destroyed the others, but this one survived because it's too remote to find easily. What does it do? It amplifies. Thorn approached the altar reverently. A First Voice standing here can extend their influence for miles, command hundreds of people simultaneously, reshape entire battlefields. Illyra's breath caught. That's terrifying? Yes. It's why the Alphas feared us so much. A single First Voice at a binding stone could end a war without shedding blood, could stop armies in their tracks, could rewrite the rules of engagement entirely. And you brought me here because Varkros is 3 months away from war. Illyra's head snapped up. What? Border tensions have been escalating for years. Your precious Alpha Torvan has been pushing into disputed territories, challenging old treaties, making enemies. Thorn's expression was grim. The Eastern Pacts are mobilizing. When winter breaks, they'll move on Varkros. And your former mate, the arrogant fool, is about to inherit command of a pack that's made itself a target. Why would I care? Because, Thorn said simply, that's your opening. When Varkros is desperate, when they're bleeding and broken and their golden heir has failed them, you walk back in, not as the weak girl they exiled, but as something they can't ignore, something they need. You want me to save them? Illyra's voice rose, incredulous. After what they did? No. Thorn's smile was sharp as broken glass. I want you to make them beg, and then decide whether they're worth saving. The next 2 months passed in a blur of training and preparation. Alira's power grew exponentially. She could now command groups of animals simultaneously, maintain control for hours without fatigue, layer commands so complex they bordered on artistic. Her wolf, still small, still hesitant, finally began to emerge more regularly, as if recognizing that weakness was a choice, not a destiny. Thorn taught her history the archives had never mentioned. Stories of first-voice queens who ruled for centuries, of councils where voices determined law rather than claws, of a time when strength meant more than brute force. They called it the Age of Accord, Thorn explained one evening, pointing to an ancient map that showed territories divided by song rather than bloodshed. For 800 years, the first voices maintained peace through mutual understanding rather than mutual destruction. What ended it? The same thing that ends all peace, ambition. Thorn's expression darkened. A young alpha named Korvax decided he was tired of negotiating. He wanted to take. So he gathered others like him, formed the first warrior packs, and started killing anyone who could stop them with words. Korvax? Alira frowned. That name sounds familiar. It should. He's the founder of the bloodline that currently rules Varkros. Thorn met her eyes. Kaelin is his direct descendant. The arrogance isn't accidental. It's inherited. The revelation settled into Alira's chest like ice. So I was matched with the bloodline that destroyed mine. Poetic, isn't it? Thorn's smile was bitter. The moon does have a sense of irony. As winter deepened, news from the border grew worse. Travelers passing through Thorn's territory brought stories of skirmishes, burned villages, displaced families. The Eastern Coalition was mobilizing faster than expected. And Varkros, arrogant in its strength, wasn't taking the threat seriously enough. Torvin thinks numbers and brutality will win, Thorn reported after interrogating a merchant. He's reinforcing the wrong borders, ignoring the mountain passes, trusting that reputation alone will deter attack. Will it? No. The Eastern Pacts have been preparing for this for a decade. They're coordinated, motivated, and they know Varkros' weaknesses. Thorn paused. Your old home is about to learn a very painful lesson about underestimating enemies. Alira should have felt satisfaction at that. Instead, she felt complicated. Varkros had exiled her, but it had also been her home. The people there weren't all cruel. Many were just following leaders who made cruelty policy. When do we move? She asked quietly. Soon. Thorn studied the sky. The Eastern Coalition will attack at the spring thaw. We give Varkros time to get desperate, to realize they can't win with conventional tactics. Then you appear. And if they don't accept my help, then they die, and you find somewhere else to build your legacy. Thorn's voice held no sympathy. But I suspect they'll accept. Pride has limits. Survival instinct usually wins, The attack came early, not at spring thaw, but midwinter, when Varkros least expected it. The Eastern Coalition had sacrificed hundreds of people to push through the mountain passes despite deadly weather. By the time Varkros realized what was happening, enemy forces were already inside their outer territories. Thorn heard the news from a refugee who'd fled the initial assault. It's bad, the woman gasped, half frozen and terrified. They came from 3 directions simultaneously. Coordinated strikes. Our warriors are good, but we're outnumbered and outmaneuvered. The air tried to rally a defense, but what? Thorn pressed. He's arrogant, refused to retreat when he should have. Lost half his best fighters in the first wave trying to hold an indefensible position. The woman's eyes were haunted. We're going to lose. Unless something changes, Varkros falls within a month. After the refugee departed, Thorn turned to Alira. It's time. Alira's heart hammered. I'm not ready. You are. You've been ready for weeks. You're just scared. Of course I'm scared. You want me to walk into a war zone and somehow convince people who hate me to accept the help they desperately need from someone powerful enough to turn the tide. Thorn gripped her shoulders. You're not that weak girl anymore, Alira. You haven't been for months. It's time you started believing it. Alira closed her eyes, reaching inward for the power that had become second nature. It was there, vast, controlled, waiting. Different from alpha dominance, subtler, deeper, terrifying. What if I fail? Then you fail. But at least you'll have tried. Thorn released her. The girl who was rejected had nothing to lose. What does the woman you've become have to fear? Everything, Illyra thought, but also nothing. She'd already lost her home, her mate, her place in the world. She died in that amphitheater when Kaelin severed their bond. What came after was something new, something the Alphas weren't prepared for. When do we leave? She asked. Thorn smiled. Tomorrow at dawn. And Illyra? Wear something dramatic. First impressions matter, and you're about to make one they'll never forget. The journey back to Varkros took 4 days through snow that cut like knives. Illyra traveled alone. Thorn had insisted on it, said the impact would be greater if she arrived without backup, without explanation, without anything that suggested she needed support. Just a lone figure emerging from the wilderness that was supposed to have killed her. Let them wonder, Thorn had said. Let them fear what you've become. The cloak Thorn gave her was dark as midnight, lined with fur from creatures Illyra couldn't identify. It hung heavy on her shoulders, but she'd learned to carry weight differently now. Her posture had changed over the months, no longer the hunched, apologetic curve of someone trying to disappear. She stood straight, moved with purpose. Her wolf paced inside her, restless but no longer terrified. Still small compared to the massive beasts Varkros prized, but compact strength had advantages. Speed, precision, the ability to slip through spaces dominance couldn't fit. On the 3rd day, she encountered her first patrol. 3 Varkros warriors, lean and desperate-looking, guarding what used to be a thriving checkpoint. Now it was just burned wood and frozen mud. They spotted her from 100 yards out, weapons raised immediately. "Stop!" The lead warrior, a woman Illyra vaguely recognized from the market districts, approached with her blade drawn. "Identify yourself or turn back." Illyra kept walking. "I said stop." The woman's voice cracked with strain. She looked exhausted, underfed. The war was clearly going worse than anyone expected. Illyra stopped 10 feet away, close enough to see recognition dawn in the warrior's eyes. No, you're dead, the exiled girl. You're supposed to be dead." "Disappointing, I know." Illyra's voice came out calm, layered with harmonics she barely had to think about anymore. Not a command, just presence. "I need to speak with whoever's currently in charge." The warrior's grip on her sword wavered. "You can't just... Is it still Kaelin? Or has he managed to get himself killed yet?" One of the other guards, younger, stepped forward. "The heir is leading the defense, not that it's any of your concern. Everything happening here is my concern." Illyra met his eyes steadily. "Because I'm the only chance you have of surviving what's coming." The lead warrior laughed, sharp and bitter. You can barely shift. What are you going to do? Talk the enemy to death?" Something in Illyra's expression must have changed because the warrior's laughter died. "Let me pass," Illyra said quietly. "Or don't. But if Varkros falls because you delayed me, that blood is on your hands." The warriors exchanged glances. The lead one looked like she wanted to argue, but exhaustion won. "Fine, but you're getting an escort, and if you try anything, you'll what? Kill me?" Illyra smiled without humor. "Others have tried." The main settlement was a war zone. Illyra could smell it before she saw it. Smoke, blood, the acrid stench of fear. Buildings bore scorch marks from fire attacks. The streets were emptier than she remembered, evacuated or dead. Guards posted at every corner, all looking like they hadn't slept in weeks. Her escort led her through back paths, avoiding the main plaza, probably trying to keep her presence quiet until they figured out what to do with her. But people noticed anyway. Whispers followed like ghosts. "Is that? Can't be. She's dead. Looks like her, but different. What's she doing back?" They brought her to the council hall, a fortified building that now served as military headquarters. Inside, maps covered every surface, marked with red slashes indicating lost territory. The air reeked of desperation and failing strategy. A guard disappeared to announce her arrival. Illyra waited in a cold antechamber, studying the visible maps. The Eastern Coalition had taken nearly a third of Varkros' outer territories. Worse, they'd cut off 2 major supply routes. The defenders were being slowly strangled. Footsteps approached. multiple sets. The door opened. Kalen stood there, and Alira's breath caught despite herself. He looked terrible. His golden eyes were bloodshot, his face gaunt with stress and lack of sleep. His clothes, usually immaculate, were stained with mud and what might be blood. But he still carried himself like an alpha, even when clearly running on fumes. Behind him stood his father Torvin, equally haggard, and several council members Alira recognized. All of them stared at her like she was a hallucination. "This is a joke." Kalen's voice was hoarse. "A sick joke." "No joke?" Alira kept her tone neutral. "I'm here to help." "Help?" Kalen laughed, the sound jagged. "You. The girl who couldn't defend herself against a mild insult. You're here to help us fight a war." "That girl is dead," Alira said simply. "You killed her when you severed the bond. What came after is something else." Torvin stepped forward, his alpha presence rolling out like a wave, meant to make her submit, drop her eyes, know her place. Alira didn't even blink. The lack of reaction clearly unsettled him. "How are you alive? The frontier kills the unprepared in days." "I got prepared." Alira glanced at the maps. "Unlike you, apparently. The Eastern Coalition is using the mountain passes you thought were impassable. They're coordinating strikes while you're defending random points. And based on these supply lines, you've got maybe 2 weeks before your people start starving." Silence. "Who told you that?" one council member demanded. "No one. It's obvious if you look." Alira traced a finger across the map, not asking permission. "You're fighting like this is a dominance contest, but they're fighting a war of attrition. They don't need to beat you, just bleed you until you collapse from within. And you can fix this how, exactly?" Kalen's voice dripped with contempt, but something flickered behind his eyes. Doubt. Or maybe hope he didn't want to acknowledge. "Give me command of your reserve forces, the ones you're holding back because you don't trust them in direct combat." "Absolutely not," Torvin snapped. "You have no military experience, no authority, no—" "I have something you don't." Alira met his eyes steadily. "A way to end fights without bloodshed, to turn your enemy's instincts against them, to make battlefields irrelevant." "Magic," Kalen said flatly. "You're claiming you have magic. I'm claiming I have a gift your ancestors spent 300 years trying to erase." Alira's voice hardened. "First voice lineage. The power to command not through dominance, but through will. And before you dismiss it as myth, remember that I just walked through 4 days of frontier wilderness that should have killed me a dozen times over." "First voices are legend," a council member scoffed. "Children's stories. So was I supposed to be. Dead in the frontier, forgotten, erased." Alira turned slowly, making eye contact with each person in the room. "Yet here I stand. Maybe your legends aren't as fictional as you think." Kalen's jaw worked. He looked like he wanted to throw her out, wanted to call guards, wanted to deny everything she represented, but desperation was etched in every line of his face. "Prove it," he said finally. "Prove you're not wasting our time. Bring me someone hostile, someone who won't cooperate willingly." Torvin's eyes narrowed. "Why?" "Because you won't believe until you see, and I'm not interested in parlor tricks with allies." Alira's voice stayed level. "Bring me an enemy prisoner, someone you've been trying to interrogate. Let's see if I can get better results." The council members exchanged glances. Kalen looked like he was calculating risks, weighing options. "Fine," Torvin said abruptly. "We have a coalition scout we captured yesterday. Hasn't said a word despite persuasion. You get 10 minutes. I'll need 5. They brought her to the holding cells beneath the council hall. The prisoner was a man in his 30s, muscular and scarred. His face was bruised from interrogation attempts, but his eyes burned with defiant hatred. When he saw the group enter, he spat at their feet. "More questions? I've got nothing to say to you animals." "We're not here to ask questions," Torvin gestured to Alira. "She is." The prisoner's gaze landed on Alira and dismissed her immediately. "What, you brought me a girl? That's supposed to scare me?" Alira ignored the jab, stepping closer to the cell. The others stayed back, watching. She could feel their skepticism like a physical weight. "What's your name?" she asked quietly. "Fuck you." "Fair enough." Alira tilted her head, studying him. "You're scared. Not of torture. You've been trained to resist that." but of failing your mission, of dying before you can report back what you learned about Varkros's defenses. The prisoner's sneer faltered slightly. You have a family, Illyra continued, her voice dropping into layered tones. Not commanding yet, just resonant. Back in the Eastern Territories. A mate. Children, maybe. You're doing this for them, to secure their future. Stop talking. You think Varkros is the enemy, the oppressor who's pushed into your lands, taken your resources, treated your people like obstacles. Illyra's voice carried harmonics now, subtle vibrations that bypassed rational thought. You're not wrong. The Alpha families have been cruel, arrogant. They've earned your hatred. Behind her, Kaelin made an angry sound. Illyra didn't turn. But here's the truth, she said, her voice strengthening. The people who'll die when your coalition wins aren't the Alphas. They'll escape, regroup, survive. It's the civilians who'll suffer, the children, the shopkeepers, the archivists and craftspeople who never hurt anyone, just like your own people suffered. The prisoner's breathing had changed, slower, more focused on her words than he probably realized. I'm not asking you to betray your mission, Illyra said softly. I'm asking you to think about whether the revenge you're taking is on the right people. Words won't change anything, the prisoner muttered, but his voice lacked its earlier venom. No, but choices will. Illyra's voice shifted, harmonics deepening. Not quite a command, more like invitation. Tell me where your coalition is planning their next strike. The prisoner's mouth opened, closed. He shook his head violently. No, I won't. Tell me. The command hit like a physical force. The prisoner gasped, his eyes going wide. When he spoke, the words came out mechanical, pulled from him despite clear resistance. Northern Pass, 3 days, dawn assault on the granaries. The cell went dead silent. Illyra stepped back, releasing the compulsion. The prisoner sagged against the wall, confusion and horror warring on his face. How did you make me? I didn't make you do anything you weren't already thinking about. Illyra's voice returned to normal, though the statement was a lie. Complete compulsion, the kind that rewrote cooperation into instinct. Part of you wanted to confess. I just gave that part permission. She turned to face Kaelin and Torvin. Both looked shaken. Northern Pass, Torvin repeated slowly. We weren't defending that approach. We thought it was too exposed for them to risk. It is exposed, Kaelin said, his strategic mind clearly working despite his shock. Which is why they're gambling we won't expect it. If they take the granaries... He didn't finish. Didn't need to. Losing the food stores would be catastrophic. You have 72 hours to prepare, Illyra said, and a choice to make. Keep fighting conventionally and lose, or give me a chance to try something different. That was... One council member struggled for words. That should be impossible. A lot of impossible things are happening lately. Illyra met Kaelin's eyes. I can do this on a larger scale, not control entire armies. I'm not that powerful yet. But I can break charges, stop bloodlust, create openings for strategic retreats. I can make your enemies hesitate at crucial moments, second-guess their instincts. That's horrifying, Kaelin said quietly. That's survival. Illyra didn't look away. You have 2 weeks of supplies. One chance to turn this around. Are you too proud to take help from someone you tried to destroy? Or are you desperate enough to do what's necessary? The question hung in the frozen air. Torvin looked at his son. Kaelin looked at the maps in his mind. The council members looked at each other. Finally, Kaelin spoke. What do you need? They gave her the reserve forces, 200 fighters deemed too inexperienced or undisciplined for frontline combat. Cannon fodder, one of Kaelin's lieutenants explained with brutal honesty when Illyra inspected them. Young, undertrained, or just not aggressive enough to hold formation under pressure. We were going to use them as a last resort defense if the walls were breached. Illyra studied the assembled group. They looked back at her with expressions ranging from confusion to outright hostility. Most were barely out of adolescence. Some bore scars from previous battles that had gone badly. All of them had the defeated air of people who knew they were considered disposable. She understood that feeling intimately. Listen up, she called out, not bothering with ceremony. I know what you've been told, that you're not good enough, not strong enough, not worthy of the real fight, that you're just here to die slowly instead of quickly. Uncomfortable shifts, a few angry glares. Your commanders are wrong, Elira continued. Not because you're secretly amazing warriors, most of you aren't, but because this war isn't going to be won with traditional strength. It's going to be won with precision, timing, and the willingness to do something none of those arrogant alphas upstairs can imagine. And what's that? Someone shouted from the back. Fighting smart instead of hard. Elira paced in front of them. The Eastern Coalition expects Varkros to meet them with overwhelming force, to rely on superior individual warriors. They're prepared for that. They've planned for it. She stopped, meeting as many eyes as she could. They haven't planned for you. A young woman near the front frowned. Why would they? We're nobody. Exactly. You're overlooked, underestimated, dismissed. Elira's voice carried across the training yard. I spent my whole life being told I was nothing, weak, worthless. And you know what? It gave me the freedom to become something they never saw coming. She had their attention now. Real attention, not just forced politeness. In 3 days, the Coalition attacks the northern granaries at dawn. Intelligence says they're bringing 500 fighters, their best. Kalen wants to meet them with 1,000 warriors in direct combat. Elira smiled grimly. We're going to do something different. Like what? A scarred older man asked. We're going to break them before they ever reach the granaries. Not with swords, with fear. She spent the next 2 days drilling them relentlessly. Not in combat. They'd never match the Coalition's warriors in direct fights. Instead, she taught them coordination, how to move as one unit, how to respond to her voice commands without thinking, how to create the illusion of overwhelming force through perfect timing. And at night, she practiced something more dangerous. You're going to attempt mass compulsion, Thorn had warned before Elira left. It's exponentially harder than controlling one person. The more minds you try to influence simultaneously, the more resistance you'll face. Push too hard and you'll burn out. Or worse. What's worse? Breaking something in yourself that doesn't heal. Elira practiced anyway. Started with 10 people, then 20. By the second night, she could hold 50 fighters in a coordinated movement pattern using nothing but her voice. The strain made her nose bleed and her vision blur, but it worked. Kalen visited the training yard on the evening before the planned defense. You're going to get them killed, he said without preamble. Elira didn't turn from watching her fighters run formations. They're already marked for death. At least this way they have a chance to matter. By following your orders, your compulsions? His voice carried disgust. That's not leadership, that's puppetry. Is it different than commanding through dominance, through alpha presence that forces submission? Yes. Dominance is natural hierarchy. What you're doing is more effective. Elira finally looked at him. More humane, more honest about what power actually is. Kalen's jaw tightened. In the fading light, he looked older than his 24 years. The war was aging him rapidly. I don't trust you, he said quietly. Good. You shouldn't. Elira gestured to her fighters. But trust isn't what we need right now. Results are. And I'm the only one offering a plan that doesn't end with Varkros burning. If this fails, then I die with everyone else. That acceptable motivation for you? He studied her for a long moment. You've changed. You noticed. Elira's voice was flat. Rejection and exile will do that. Turns out surviving what should kill you builds character. I didn't think... Kalen stopped himself. Didn't think I'd survive? I know. That was the point. Elira turned away. You should get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be brutal for all of us. She heard him leave, his footsteps fading into the darkness, and hated that some small part of her still reacted to his presence. The severed bond had scars, apparently, phantom pain from an attachment that should be dead. Focus, she told herself. Tomorrow you prove him wrong. Tomorrow you save the people who wanted you dead. And maybe, finally, you can stop caring what he thinks. Dawn came cold and clear. Elira positioned her 200 fighters in the forest surrounding the northern approach to the granaries. Not in defensive formation, in an ambush pattern Kalen's lieutenants had dismissed as too risky. They'll see us coming, the lieutenant had argued. We won't have the element of surprise. We don't need surprise, Illyra had replied. We need terror. Now, crouched in frozen underbrush, she could hear the coalition forces approaching, 500 strong, moving with military precision. Their scouts had confirmed the granaries were lightly defended, which was true. Kalen had most of his forces positioned elsewhere, ready to respond once the attack began. But Illyra's plan didn't require reinforcements. On my mark, she whispered. The command rippled through her fighters through a combination of hand signals and subtle voice projection. Remember, coordination over courage, movement over fighting. Make them think there's 1,000 of you. The coalition forces reached the clearing. Their commander, a massive alpha with ritual scars, raised his hand to signal the charge. Illyra struck first. Stop. Her voice crashed across the clearing, layered with every ounce of compulsion she could channel. It wasn't directed at her own fighters. They wore makeshift ear protection she'd designed. But the coalition forces... The front line froze mid-step. Confusion rippled through the ranks. Scatter! 200 voices joined hers in perfect synchronization, creating a wall of sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The coalition's formation wavered. Then Illyra's fighters emerged from the trees. Not attacking, moving. A choreographed pattern that made 200 look like 2,000, fighters appearing and disappearing through the forest, creating the illusion of endless reinforcements. Wolves howling in calculated sequence to multiply the sound. You are surrounded. The compulsion in Illyra's voice didn't force belief. It planted doubt. Made the coalition fighters' instincts scream danger. Made their training war with their perception. And in that moment of hesitation, everything changed. The coalition's tight formation broke. Fighters scattered, looking for enemies that weren't there, responding to threats created by acoustics and coordination. Their commander shouted orders, but his voice couldn't compete with the layered harmonics drowning out rational thought. Retreat or die! Illyra pushed harder than she ever had. Her vision tunneled. Blood trickled from her nose, her ears, but she held the compulsion, making it feel inevitable, making retreat the only logical option. The coalition forces ran. Not all of them. Their commander and his inner circle held position, too experienced to fall for auditory tricks. But they'd lost 3/4 of their force to panic in under 5 minutes. Now, Illyra gasped. Her fighters attacked. Not the scattered masses, but the remaining core. 50 disciplined warriors against 200 coordinated fighters who'd already proven they could think strategically. The fight was brutal, but brief. When it ended, the coalition commander lay dead. His inner circle had surrendered, and Illyra collapsed. She woke in the medical wing, Thorn's warnings about burnout echoing in her skull. You pushed too hard. Kalen sat beside her bed, looking haggard. The healer said you nearly stopped your own heart with the feedback. Illyra's throat felt like she'd swallowed glass. Did it work? You broke a 500-strong assault force with 200 fighters and no deaths on our side. Kalen's voice was strange. The coalition is in complete disarray. Their commanders are arguing, their fighters are demoralized. Yes, it worked. Good. Silence settled between them. Illyra studied the ceiling, too exhausted to manage eye contact. I owe you an apology, Kalen said finally. You owe me a lot more than that. I know. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. What I did at the Rite, I was wrong. Not just about your strength, but about what strength means. I've spent months learning that lesson the hard way. And you think apologizing fixes it? No, nothing fixes it. Kalen's voice went quiet. But I'm trying to understand who you've become, and why I was too blind to see who you already were. Illyra finally looked at him. Really looked. Saw genuine regret there. And something else. Respect. Maybe even fear. I didn't come back for your approval, she said. I came back to prove a point. What point? That the girl you rejected wasn't weak. She was sleeping. Illyra's voice strengthened despite the pain. And you woke something that's going to change everything. Before Kalen could respond, alarms sounded. A guard burst through the door, panting. The coalition is regrouping. They've called in reinforcements from the eastern territories. We've got 2,000 fighters marching on the main gates. Kalen surged to his feet. When? 3 days. Maybe less. How many do we have? After today's losses? 800 combat ready, another 300 if we count the injured. The math was brutal. Even with Elira's tricks, they couldn't hold against those numbers. Kaelin looked at Elira. Can you do what you did today on a larger scale? No, the burnout would kill me. Elira struggled to sit up. But I might have another option. What? Let them take the city. The guard's jaw dropped. Kaelin looked like she'd slapped him. You want to surrender? He said slowly. I want to make them think they've won. Elira's mind raced despite the exhaustion. Then take it all back in one move. That's insane. So was defending the granaries with 200 reserves. How'd that work out? Kaelin stared at her. Then, against all odds, he laughed, sharp and slightly unhinged. Fine. Tell me your insane plan. Because conventional warfare clearly isn't working. Elira smiled despite the pain. Get me Corvina, the elder who presided over our rejection. I need to ask her about binding stones. Corvina arrived within the hour, moving with a speed that defied her ancient bones. She took one look at Elira and dismissed everyone except Kaelin with a sharp gesture. Binding stones, she said without preamble. You're asking about weapons your ancestors spent generations trying to erase from history. I'm asking about survival. Elira's voice came out hoarse but steady. Thorn told me about them, said they could amplify a first voice's power across miles, make one person command hundreds. Thorn, Corvina's expression shifted. That old hermit is still alive? Very much so, and she knew I'd need this information eventually. Kaelin looked between them, frustration evident on his face. Someone want to explain what we're talking about? Corvina settled into a chair, suddenly looking every one of her 80-plus years. The first voices built 7 amplification sites before the Alpha purges. Structures carved from black stone, inscribed with power that doesn't fade. A voice standing at one of those sites could extend their influence for miles, command entire armies, stop battles before they started. That's why they were destroyed, Kaelin said slowly. Your ancestors tried, managed to demolish 6 of them over 50 years of systematic hunting. Corvina's eyes went distant. The 7th survived because it was too remote to find easily, hidden in the mountains northeast of here. Elira's pulse quickened. How far? 3 miles, maybe 4. Corvina leaned forward. But before you get excited, understand what you're considering. The binding stones don't just amplify power, they magnify cost. Everything you do through one happens at 10 times the intensity, including the damage to yourself. Define damage, mental fracturing, physical burnout. I once saw a woman use a stone fragment to divert a flood. She saved her village, then her mind shattered like dropped glass. Lived another week with empty eyes before her body finally stopped. Corvina's voice went hard. The stones give you enough power to accomplish miracles, and enough rope to hang yourself trying. The medical wing fell silent, except for distant sounds of war preparations. We don't have a choice, Elira said finally. The coalition is bringing 2,000 fighters. Kaelin has 800 at best. Even with my tricks, we can't win conventionally. So your plan is what? Let them invade, then use the stone to command mass surrender? Corvina's tone suggested she already knew the answer. Exactly that. It'll probably kill you. I'm already supposed to be dead. This way, at least it means something. Kaelin made a frustrated sound. This is insane. We can't base our entire defense on a legend and a woman who nearly died this morning. You have a better option? Elira challenged. Because I'm listening. He didn't answer. Corvina studied them both for a long moment. If you're truly going to attempt this, we need to prepare properly. The stone responds to clear intention. Any hesitation, any uncertainty, and the feedback will tear you apart. How long do I have? The coalition arrives in 3 days. Corvina stood. That gives us 72 hours to teach you what should take years. We'll need privacy, and I'll need access to the archive's restricted sections. Kaelin's eyes narrowed. Those records were sealed by my grandfather. Your grandfather was a fool who thought burning knowledge made it disappear. Corvina's voice carried centuries of contempt. I've been the keeper of this pack's true history for longer than you've been alive. I know what's in those vaults, and this girl needs it if she's going to survive what's coming. The two stared at each other, old authority versus new power. Finally, Kaelin exhaled. Fine. You get your access. But if this plan fails, then we all die anyway, Elira cut in. So what does it matter? The next 2 days blurred into exhaustion and revelation. Corvina took Elira deep into the archives, past public records into chambers that smelled of dust and secrets. The texts she produced were ancient, some written in languages that hurt to read, symbols that seemed to shift when Elira wasn't looking directly at them. First voice notation, Corvina explained, watching Elira struggle through a particularly complex passage. The words themselves carry power. You have to mean them while reading, or they stay meaningless. Elira tried again, this time pushing intention into the symbols. They suddenly snapped into focus. Instructions for channeling amplified commands without burning out your own mind in the process. Better, but you're still holding back. Corvina tapped the page. This isn't about being careful. It's about being absolute. When you use the stone, there's no room for doubt, no space for mercy. You impose your will and accept the cost. That sounds like what the alphas do. No. Alphas dominate through threat of violence. You'll be commanding through inevitability. Corvina's expression was unreadable. It's subtler, more complete, and far more dangerous to the person doing it. They worked through meditation techniques that felt more like controlled drowning, pushing Elira's consciousness to its limits, then forcing her to maintain clarity while fragmented. She failed repeatedly, came back gasping and disoriented. Again, Corvina ordered without sympathy. I can't. Then you'll die at the stone. Again. By the second night, Elira could hold her awareness split across multiple focal points for nearly a minute. Not long enough. Not even close. But progress. You're learning faster than you should, Corvina observed, watching Elira practice breath control. Either you're naturally talented or desperate enough that your mind is adapting out of pure survival instinct. Does it matter which? Not really, though desperation tends to burn brighter and faster. The old woman paused. Why are you really doing this? And don't tell me it's about saving Varkros. I'm too old for noble lies. Elira considered deflecting, then decided honesty was easier. I want him to see what he threw away. Want all of them to understand that their definition of strength was incomplete. Revenge. Justice. Same thing, different marketing. Corvina's smile was sharp. Good. Anger is excellent fuel if you know how to burn it controlled. Just make sure it doesn't consume you before you're finished. Meanwhile, chaos consumed Varkros. Kaelin's plan to appear defeated required pulling back defenses, weakening the walls strategically, creating the illusion of a broken city ready to fall. Half the council thought he'd lost his mind. The other half thought he was committing treason. Commander Breck tried to organize a coup this morning, Kaelin reported during one of their brief coordination meetings. His face was haggard, eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. Said I was betraying our people to save my own pride. What did you do? Arrested him, and the 6 officers who agreed with him. Kaelin's voice was hollow. I'm holding our own warriors prisoner while an enemy army marches on our gates. This is what your plan requires. My plan requires you to look weak while staying strong enough to capitalize when the moment comes, Elira corrected. Can your fighters pull that off? They're professionals. They'll follow orders even when they hate them. He paused. But if this fails, I won't have just lost the city. I'll have destroyed our morale from within. Then don't fail. Easy for you to say. You just have to not die using ancient magic. Exactly. Simple. Despite the gallows humor, tension was eating both of them alive. The coalition's approach was visible now from the eastern walls, a massive force moving with the confidence of certain victory. Scouts reported their commanders were already dividing up Varkros's territories, planning the occupation as though it were a foregone conclusion. They think we're already broken, one scout reported to the War Council. Their discipline is getting sloppy. They're celebrating before the battle even starts. Good, Kaelin said grimly. Arrogance makes people careless. We'll use that. On the final night before the invasion, Kaelin found Elira in the archives where she'd been living for 48 hours straight. She was surrounded by open texts, her hands bleeding from practicing grip techniques that would let her hold the stone longer without her skin tearing completely. You should rest, he said. I'll rest when I'm dead. Which might be tomorrow, so there's that. Elira, Don't. She didn't look up from the text she'd been studying. No speeches, no apologies. We're past that. I know, but I need to say this anyway. Kalen moved closer, his footsteps echoing in the empty chamber. If you die tomorrow doing this, it's my fault. Everything that's led to this moment started with my arrogance at that moon rite. True. I was wrong about you, about what strength means, about everything that mattered. I know you were wrong. Alira finally met his eyes. Everyone was wrong. That's the point I'm trying to make with this insane plan. By potentially killing yourself. If that's what it takes. She turned back to her studies. Go get some sleep. Tomorrow you'll need to be the alpha heir everyone thinks you are. Confident, commanding, utterly in control while your world burns around you. And you'll be at the stone, holding 2,000 minds in compulsion while your body tears itself apart. See? We both have our roles to play. Kalen was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. For what it's worth, I hope you survive. Not because of Varkros, not because of guilt, because I'd like the chance to know who you've become when we're not in crisis mode, when there's time for something other than survival. Alira felt something twist in her chest. Not the old bond. That was dead, burned away in the rejection. But maybe the beginning of something else. Something neither of them had words for yet. Something fragile and uncertain and entirely dependent on both of them surviving the next day. Win tomorrow, she said quietly. Then we'll figure out what comes next. He left without another word, his shadow disappearing down the corridor. Alira returned to her studies, but the words blurred. She found herself thinking about the moon rite, about standing on that platform while Kalen destroyed her in front of thousands, about walking into the frontier expecting to die. She'd come so far from that moment, become someone that girl could never have imagined, and tomorrow she'd either prove it definitively or die trying. Dawn came with horns and war cries that shook the valley. The coalition hit Varkros's gates in 3 coordinated waves, exactly as predicted. Their commanders had learned from previous engagements, adapted their tactics to exploit what they thought were Varkros's weaknesses. They expected fierce resistance at the walls, a desperate last stand from a city that had run out of options. Instead, they found defenders who gave ground reluctantly but steadily, fighting just hard enough to seem genuine, but not hard enough to actually hold the fortifications. It looked like defeat, smelled like defeat, tasted like the victory the coalition had been promised. From her position on the northeast ridge, Alira could see everything. The stone stood before her, cleared of 3 centuries of deliberate rubble by Corvina and a handful of trusted elders who'd worked through the night in absolute silence. 8 feet of black rock carved with symbols that seemed to breathe in the pre-dawn light, expanding and contracting with a rhythm that matched no heartbeat Alira had ever felt. It knows you're here, Corvina said, standing beside her. Can you feel it reaching out? Alira could. A pull like gravity, but wronger. Not physical, but mental, trying to draw her consciousness closer. Her blood resonated with frequencies that shouldn't exist in nature. Every nerve in her body was screaming warnings that something fundamental and dangerous was near. Once you touch it, the amplification begins immediately, Corvina warned for what must have been the dozenth time. You'll have maybe 20 seconds before the strain becomes dangerous, 3 minutes before it becomes potentially fatal. Push beyond 5 and you're not coming back. Your mind will fragment past any point of recovery. How long do I actually need? Minimum 4 minutes for Kalen's forces to disarm 2,000 fighters. They're good, but they're not miracle workers. 5 minutes would be safer. Give them margin for error. So I need to hold the absolute maximum time anyone's ever managed without dying, and then push 30 seconds beyond that. Essentially, yes. Great plan. Very reassuring. Corvina's expression softened slightly. You don't have to do this. We could still try conventional defense. It would probably fail, but at least you'd survive to see it. No, I wouldn't. If Varkros falls, they'll execute anyone associated with leadership. I'm too visible now, too much of a threat. Alira studied the stone. This way, at least there's a chance of something better on the other side. Below, the coalition breached Varkros's inner walls right on schedule, flooded into the city proper like water through broken levees. Their victory cries echoed across the valley, triumphant and terrible. They're taking the bait, one of Corvina's assistants murmured, watching through a far-seeing lens cobbled together from old archive equipment, pouring into the central plaza, exactly where we want them concentrated. Now we see if the hook holds. Corvina turned to Alira. Are you ready? No. Absolutely not. This was insane. She was about to attempt something that had killed the last person who tried it, except she was aiming to do it stronger and longer. Every rational part of her mind was screaming to run. Yes, Elira lied. She approached the stone. This close, she could hear it singing, not sound exactly, but vibration that existed below normal hearing, like standing next to a massive bell that had been struck hours ago and was still resonating at frequencies human ears couldn't quite catch. Her bones hummed in sympathy. Her teeth ached. The sensation was deeply, fundamentally wrong. The symbols covering its surface weren't just carvings. They were moving, rearranging themselves in patterns that responded to her presence, welcoming her, or maybe warning her, or maybe both simultaneously, hard to tell with ancient magic. When you place your hands on the surface, open yourself completely to the power, Corvina instructed one final time. Don't try to control the flow. That'll just create resistance and burn you out faster. Let it move through you. You're a channel, not a dam. The moment you try to be both, you break. And the compulsion itself? Simple and absolute. Don't give them options. Don't negotiate. Don't leave any room for their will to push back against yours. Make surrender the only possible reality. Command it like you're stating a fundamental law of physics. Corvina's voice went hard. And Elira? Don't hesitate, not even for a heartbeat. Hesitation at this power level means death. Yours and everyone else's. Below, the coalition forces were spreading through Varkros's streets like a disease. Kaelin's defenders had fallen back to predetermined positions, carefully planned pockets of resistance that looked like desperate last stands but were actually strategic placements designed to give clear firing lines once the coalition was disarmed. Everything was ready, every piece in position. The trap was set. Time to find out if Elira was strong enough to spring it without dying in the process. She placed both palms flat against the stone's surface. The world detonated. Power slammed into her like being hit by an avalanche. Raw, ancient, vast beyond any comprehension her human mind was designed to handle. Her consciousness expanded violently, suddenly aware of every living thing within miles. She could feel the coalition warriors flooding through the city like ants in a disturbed hill. Feel Varkros's defenders holding their positions with discipline forged through weeks of impossible training. Feel small creatures fleeing the violence, birds taking flight, rats abandoning buildings. Feel the stone itself, patient and hungry, and utterly inhuman in its purpose. It was too much, too fast, too everything. Her mind couldn't process the input, thousands of separate consciousnesses all screaming for attention simultaneously. Focus. Corvina's training snapped into place like a lifeline. Don't try to see everything. You'll go mad. Find your target. Lock onto it. Everything else is noise. Elira narrowed her awareness, hunting through the chaos for the invading force. Found them. 2,000 minds burning with aggression and triumph and the sweet taste of imminent victory. They thought they'd won. Thought Varkros was finished, broken, ready to be divided up among the coalition territories like spoils. Time to teach them otherwise. But the sheer scale made her hesitate. 2,000 individual consciousnesses, each one a complete person with their own thoughts and fears and reasons for fighting. Families waiting for them back home. Dreams of what they'd do after the war. How could she just override all of that? Delete their agency like it meant nothing? The stone pulsed. Warning. The amplification was building exponentially, power accumulating with nowhere to go. She needed to use it, or it would use her, find its own outlet through the path of least resistance, which happened to be her mind. Do it, now, before you lose the nerve. Elira reached out with her amplified awareness, touching the surface of those 2,000 minds, felt their victory, their bloodlust, their certainty that this day belonged to them. Then she pushed. Stop. The command erupted from her throat, amplified by the stone into something that rewrote reality itself. It crashed across the city like a tsunami of pure will, an irresistible force that admitted no possibility of resistance. Every coalition fighter froze mid-step. Swords stopped mid-swing. Arrows halted in mid-air. Victory cries died in throats suddenly incapable of sound. 2,000 warriors stood perfectly still, trapped in a moment that Elira held suspended through sheer force of intention, backed by 3 centuries of accumulated power. The strain was immediate and catastrophic. Pain exploded behind her eyes like something had detonated inside her skull. Blood poured from her nose in a hot rush, splashing onto the stone's black surface where it sizzled and steamed. She could feel something inside her consciousness beginning to crack, like ice over a deep lake under too much weight, hairline fractures spreading through her thoughts faster than she could track. But she held. Kneel. They knelt. All of them. Hardened warriors who'd never surrendered in their lives, who'd been trained since childhood to die before submitting, dropping to their knees on Varkros's blood-stained cobblestones like puppets with cut strings. 10 seconds elapsed. Elira's vision was already blurring red. The cracks in her mind spread wider, deeper, branching into fractal patterns of destruction. She could feel pieces of herself starting to fragment, memories dissolving at the edges like sugar in water, thoughts becoming harder to hold together, her sense of identity beginning to blur. Keep going. Just a little longer. They need time. 20 seconds. Her hands were fusing to the stone, skin bonding with ancient rock at a molecular level. She couldn't release her grip even if she wanted to. The power flowed through her in a circuit that was burning her away from the inside out, consuming everything that made her human to fuel the impossible things she was doing. Below, Kalen's forces were moving through the frozen invaders like shadows, collecting weapons with frantic efficiency, binding hands with rope they'd prepared in advance, working against a clock only they understood, knowing that every second Elira held this compulsion was costing her something she could never get back. 30 seconds. Something inside Elira ruptured. She screamed, the sound layered with harmonics that made the stone itself shudder and crack. The compulsion wavered. Several coalition fighters twitched, muscles spasming as their own will tried to reassert itself against the command. Stay down! She slammed the command harder, forcing compliance through desperate strength that shouldn't exist. Drawing on reserves she didn't have, burning through whatever remained of her physical limits. The fighter stilled immediately, but the cost was mounting exponentially with every passing second. 40 seconds. You need to release them soon. Corvina's voice penetrated the agony, distant and distorted like hearing someone shout from underwater. Your mind is fragmenting. I can literally see pieces of your consciousness breaking off. This is too much. Not yet. Not yet. They're not secured yet. 50 seconds. The fractures became canyons. Entire sections of Elira's consciousness were falling away into darkness like chunks of cliff collapsing into the sea. She couldn't remember her own name anymore. Couldn't remember why this mattered, why she was doing this, what she was fighting for. All that remained was the compulsion itself, a singular purpose burning in the hollow where her identity used to exist. 1 minute. Kalen's warriors had the coalition commanders bound now, the high-value targets secured with extra rope and guarded by multiple fighters. The officers disarmed, their weapons collected into piles, the front ranks secured and controlled, but the rest were still dangerous. Still armed in many cases, still capable of organized resistance if Elira released the compulsion too soon and they managed to shake off the mental fog. So she didn't release them. 2 minutes. This was beyond pain now. Pain required a self to feel it, and Elira's self was dissolving like morning mist. She existed only as will, pure, stubborn refusal to let go manifested in the space where a person used to be. Her body was irrelevant. Her thoughts were fragments. Her identity was ashes. Only the command mattered. Stay down, stay down, stay down. 3 minutes. This was the point where the woman Corvina mentioned had shattered completely. Elira understood why with terrible clarity. The strain had transcended any physical limits the human body was designed to handle. Holding this much power for this long was fundamentally impossible. It violated basic principles of what flesh and mind could endure. She did it anyway, because impossible was just another word for difficult. 4 minutes. Elira! Corvina was screaming now, her ancient voice cracking with genuine terror. Release them, or you die. You've done enough. Let go. Die. The word seemed meaningless, abstract. Elira had already died in the frontier when Kalen exiled her. had died again on the platform during the moon rite. This was just the final installment of a death that started months ago. But something stirred in what remained of her fragmenting consciousness. A thought that felt important, even though she couldn't quite grasp why it mattered. You survived too much to become a martyr now. You're not done yet. 4 minutes, 30 seconds. Kalen raised his hand high, the signal they'd agreed on. The disarmament was complete. Every coalition fighter secured, disarmed, controlled. The city was saved. Elira could let go now. She tried. The compulsion had rooted too deep. Her will and the stone's power had fused together, become one continuous circuit. Letting go would mean severing a part of herself that might not survive the separation. 4 minutes, 45 seconds. I can't, she gasped, the words bubbling through blood. It won't release. Corvina was suddenly there, hands on Elira's shoulders. You have to force it. Break the connection before it breaks you completely. How? Choose to let go. The command in Corvina's voice, not amplified by the stone but carrying the weight of 7 decades of first voice training, cut through the feedback loop, gave Elira something external to push against. She gathered what remained of her will, everything that hadn't been consumed by the compulsion, every scrap of identity still intact. And she pulled. The backlash was worse than anything that came before. Power that had been flowing through her in a controlled circuit suddenly reversed direction, slamming back into her body with enough force to stop her heart cold. Every nerve ignited simultaneously. Her spine arched backward at an angle that should have snapped it. Her hands tore away from the stone, leaving behind skin and flesh and blood that the ancient rock absorbed hungrily. She heard herself scream, a sound that didn't belong to anything human. Then she was falling backward, the ridge spinning around her in nauseating circles. Sky and ground kept exchanging places. Someone's arms caught her before she hit the rocks, but she couldn't tell whose. Couldn't see anything through the blood and the damage. Multiple voices were shouting at once, Corvina barking orders, someone else crying. A third voice calling for healers with desperate urgency. But Elira couldn't respond. Her consciousness was scattered across 2,000 foreign minds like shrapnel, pieces of herself lost in alien thoughts and memories that weren't hers. She tried to pull back together, to gather the fragments, but the damage was too severe. She was fragmented, incomplete, dying. Her heart had stopped. She could feel its terrible absence. No pulse, no rhythm, just awful stillness in her chest where life should be beating, hands pressed against her sternum. Someone was trying to restart her heart manually, ribs cracking under the desperate pressure. The sound was wet and wrong. Come on, Corvina's voice, tight with fear and rage. Don't you dare die on me now. Not after what you just accomplished. You don't get to be a martyr. I forbid it. Pressure. Release. Pressure. Release. Nothing. More pressure. Something definitely broke that time. Still nothing. Breathe, Corvina, Corvina screamed, her ancient voice cracking. Elira couldn't. Her body had forgotten how. The connection between will and flesh had been severed completely by the stone's feedback. She was conscious, barely, but her body was just meat now, unresponsive, dead weight. She was slipping away. Could feel the darkness pulling at what remained of her consciousness, like a riptide dragging someone out to sea. It would be so easy to let go. To finally rest after months of surviving the unsurvivable. To just stop. But that stubborn core, the part that had refused to die in the frontier, that had clawed its way back from exile, that had learned impossible power out of sheer spite, refused one more time. She dragged in a breath. It hurt worse than anything. Worse than the stone, worse than the compulsion, worse than having her heart stopped and restarted and stopped again. Air felt like broken glass in her lungs, every molecule of oxygen scraping tissue already shredded by the feedback. But she breathed. Her heart stuttered. Missed a beat. Missed 2. Then caught rhythm again. Weak and irregular and barely adequate, but beating. There! Corvina's relief was palpable, visceral. Stay with us. You're not done yet. You hear me? Not done. Elira tried to respond, but her voice was gone, completely destroyed, burned away by the amplified commands that had poured through her throat. She managed to crack her eyes open just a sliver. Kalen stood over her, his face ashen, eyes wide with something between awe and horror. Behind him, the sky was lightening toward full dawn. The battle was over. The war was won. "You did it," he said quietly, his voice rough. "The coalition surrendered, all of them. Every single fighter laid down their weapons. We didn't lose a single defender. You saved everyone." Saved. The word seemed abstract, meaningless. Alira tried to smile, but her face wouldn't cooperate. Everything hurt. Her hands were ruined. She could see bone where skin should be. Her voice was destroyed beyond repair. Her mind felt like shattered glass poorly glued back together, pieces missing, edges that would never fit properly again. But they'd won. Varkros would survive. She'd proven her point. "Get her to the healers," Corvina ordered, her voice still shaking. "Now. Move carefully. Her ribs are broken. Probably internal bleeding, possible spine damage. Go!" They lifted Alira as gently as possible. The motion sent fresh waves of agony through her damaged body despite their care. She whimpered despite herself, the sound pitiful without her voice to give it strength. As they carried her down the ridge toward Varkros, Alira caught glimpses of the city below through vision that kept blurring in and out. Coalition warriors still kneeling in the streets, surrounded by Varkros defenders. No fighting, no bloodshed, no bodies piled in the plaza. Just surrender. Complete and absolute and entirely bloodless. She'd done it. Actually done the impossible thing. Changed the entire war in 5 minutes of sustained hell. The last thing she saw before unconsciousness finally claimed her completely was Kalen walking alongside the stretcher, one hand hovering near hers, like he wanted to touch but didn't dare. His expression was complicated, awe and guilt and respect and something else she was too damaged to identify. Then darkness rose up and swallowed her whole, and Alira knew nothing for a very long time. Alira woke to pain and whispers. The pain was everywhere, a dull, grinding ache that had replaced her entire nervous system. Her hands were wrapped in bandages so thick she couldn't move her fingers. Her throat felt like someone had scraped it raw with broken glass. Breathing hurt. Existing hurt. The whispers came from somewhere beyond the curtain surrounding her bed. Multiple voices, trying to be quiet and failing. 3 days, and she's still not fully conscious. The damage to her vocal cords is permanent, the healers said. Doesn't matter. What she did was impossible anyway. Saved the entire city, and they're debating whether to thank her or exile her again. That last one cut through the fog. Alira forced her eyes open, immediately regretting it when light stabbed into her skull. "She's awake!" Someone moved the curtain aside. A young healer Alira didn't recognize peered down at her with wide eyes. "Don't try to talk. Your throat needs more time. Weeks, maybe months, possibly never." Alira tried anyway. What came out was a rasping wheeze that sounded like wind through a broken window. "I said don't." The healer pressed a cup of water to her lips. "Small sips. Your esophagus is still healing from the internal damage." The water hurt going down, but Alira's throat was so dry she didn't care. She managed 3 sips before choking. "Good. That's progress." The healer made notes on a piece of parchment. "You've been unconscious for 3 days. The council has been asking when you'd wake up. I'll need to inform them." Alira shook her head weakly. Not ready for the council. Not ready for questions or politics or whatever fresh hell awaited. "Sorry, not optional." The healer looked genuinely apologetic. "You're kind of the center of everything right now. The coalition surrendered because of you. 2,000 fighters disarmed without a single casualty. It's unprecedented. People need to know you're alive." Alive. Barely. Alira felt like she'd been put through a meat grinder and poorly reassembled on the other side. The healer left to make her report. Alira lay there, cataloging damage. Her hands were the worst. She could feel the absence of skin, the exposed nerve endings screaming even through whatever pain medication they'd given her. Her ribs ached with every breath, broken and healing badly. And her mind felt wrong, like a puzzle with pieces missing. Memories had holes. Thoughts didn't connect properly. She'd reach for something she knew she should remember and find only void. The stone had taken more than flesh. "You're awake," Kalen's voice. Alira turned her head slowly, fighting nausea from the movement. He stood in the doorway, looking like he hadn't slept since the battle. Dark circles under his eyes, clothes rumpled, face haggard with exhaustion and stress. But he was whole, undamaged, standing there in one piece while Elira was held together with bandages and hope. "Don't try to talk," he said, moving closer. "The healers explained, your voice might not come back." Elira wanted to ask 1,000 questions, wanted to know what happened after she passed out, how the surrender had been handled, what the coalition's terms were, wanted to know if this nightmare was actually over. Instead, she just stared at him. Kalen pulled up a chair, settling into it like his legs couldn't hold him anymore. "You scared the hell out of everyone. Corvina said you were dead for almost 2 minutes. Your heart stopped, you weren't breathing, blood everywhere. They had to break 3 of your ribs doing compressions." Elira gestured weakly at her bandaged hands. "Your hands are bad. The healers aren't sure how much function you'll recover. The stone's power fused your skin to the rock at a molecular level. When you pulled away, it took everything with it: skin, muscle, some bone." Kalen's voice was carefully controlled, but something underneath it was breaking. "They're doing what they can, but you might never have full use of them again." The information settled over Elira like a shroud. No voice, possibly no hands. What was she now? What could she do without the tools that had made her powerful? "But you're alive," Kalen continued. "Against every possible odd, you survived. And because you did, Varkros survived. The Coalition's commanders are negotiating terms now, surprisingly reasonable terms considering we beat them." Elira managed to raise one eyebrow. The gesture made her head throb. "They're claiming the compulsion you used was dishonorable, against the old codes of warfare. That commanding surrender through mental force is no different than poison or ambush, tactics beneath warriors." Kalen's expression was complicated. "Half of our own council agrees with them." Of course they did. Elira had won using methods the Alphas couldn't understand or control. That made her dangerous. More dangerous than the enemy they'd just defeated. "Torvin wants you exiled again," Kalen said bluntly. "Says you're too powerful to leave unchecked. That what you did to the Coalition you could do to Varkros. He's got support from the traditionalist faction." Elira's vision blurred with something that might have been tears or might have been concussion. She'd saved them, saved every single person in this city, and their response was to throw her away again because she'd done it wrong. "I'm not letting that happen," Kalen said quietly. "I've spent 3 days arguing with the council, with my father, with anyone who'd listen. You saved us. That means something. That has to mean something." Elira wanted to believe him, but she'd heard promises before, had heard the moonrite vows that were supposed to bind them together forever. Words were cheap. "I know you don't trust me," Kalen said, reading her expression. "I don't blame you, but I'm not the same person who rejected you. These past months, watching you come back from exile, seeing what you're capable of, realizing how catastrophically wrong I was about everything." He trailed off. "I can't undo what I did, but I can make sure the city I'm about to inherit doesn't make the same mistake twice." Before Elira could attempt a response, footsteps approached. Multiple sets. Corvina swept in like a storm, her ancient face set in lines of fury. "Out," she ordered Kalen. "The girl needs rest, not political maneuvering." "I'm not maneuvering. You're the heir apparent standing over a woman who can't defend herself verbally. That's maneuvering whether you intend it or not. Out." Kalen left without further argument. Corvina waited until his footsteps faded before turning to Elira. "How much did he tell you?" Elira held up 3 fingers, then pointed to her throat and shook her head. 3 days unconscious, voice possibly gone forever. What else?" Elira gestured at her hands. "Permanent damage, functionality uncertain." "Yes." Corvina settled into the chair Kalen had vacated. "What he didn't tell you is that the city is in chaos. The Coalition surrendered, yes, but their commanders are claiming you used forbidden magic, dark arts that violate the old treaties. They're demanding you be handed over to face judgment from the combined territories." Elira's eyes widened. "Torvin is considering it," Corvina continued, her voice going hard. "Thinks trading you to the Coalition might secure better terms. Keep the peace. Sacrifice one person to save thousands more." The same logic that had driven her exile in the first place. Elira was expendable, had always been expendable. The only thing that changed was which group wanted her gone. "But," Corvina said, leaning forward, "there's a complication he didn't anticipate." Elira waited. The people saw what you did, all of them. They watched from the walls as you held 2,000 warriors frozen in place. Watched you save their homes, their families, their lives without shedding a drop of blood. Corvina's smile was sharp. You're not just some exile who wandered back anymore. You're a legend, and legends are very difficult to trade away quietly. Hope stirred in Elira's chest, fragile and uncertain. There's going to be a hearing, Corvina said. 3 days from now, when you're strong enough to stand, the council will decide your fate. Whether you're a hero or a criminal, whether Varkros protects you or sacrifices you. She paused. Can you be ready? Elira looked at her ruined hands, felt her destroyed voice, cataloged the damage the stone had done. She was broken, possibly permanently. What could she possibly say or do to defend herself when she couldn't even speak? But she'd survived the frontier, survived the rejection, survived the stone itself. She'd survived this too. Elira nodded, numb. The next 3 days were a race against her own body's limitations. The healers worked around the clock trying to restore function to her hands. They used techniques Elira had never seen, combining herbal treatments with what looked suspiciously like first voice methods, using sound and intention to encourage healing at a cellular level. Corvina's been teaching us, one healer admitted when Elira gave her a questioning look. Says if you survive the binding stone, the least we can do is give you working hands back. Though I have to warn you, they'll never be the same. The scarring is too deep. Elira gestured for paper and pen, wrote with clumsy, bandaged fingers. Will I be able to hold things? Eventually, maybe, with practice and a lot of pain. The healer's expression was sympathetic. The nerve damage is severe. You might not have fine motor control, but gross movements should be possible. Gross movements. Not exactly inspiring, but better than nothing. Her voice was a different story. The damage to your vocal cords is catastrophic, the lead healer explained on the second day. The amplified commands you channeled through the stone essentially burned away the tissue. What's left is scar tissue that can't vibrate properly. You might recover whispers, possibly rough speech if you're very lucky. But that voice you used to command the coalition, that's gone. Elira had expected this, still hurt to hear it confirmed. She wrote, Can I still use the power without speaking? The healer looked uncomfortable. That's outside my expertise. You'd need to ask Corvina. Corvina's answer was more complicated. First voice abilities don't require verbal speech specifically, she explained during one of her daily visits. The power comes from will, from intention. Speech is just the most effective channel because sound carries intention into the physical world. She paused. But there are other methods. Sign language combined with focused will. Written commands if you have time to prepare them. Direct mental projection, though that's exponentially harder. Elira wrote, Bother, so I'm not powerless. No, but you're significantly limited. The verbal component made your commands immediate and undeniable. Without it, you'll have to work much harder for the same effect. Corvina's expression was unreadable. Which might actually be good. The ease of verbal commands was making you careless. Now you'll have to think before imposing your will. It wasn't comforting, but it was honest. Meanwhile, the city buzzed with speculation and argument. Elira couldn't leave the medical wing, but people came to her. Fighters who'd seen the battle from the walls, wanting to thank her. Civilians who'd lost family in previous engagements, grateful the final battle had been bloodless. Even a few coalition prisoners brought under guard, who wanted to see the woman who'd conquered their minds. How did you do it? One coalition officer asked through the bars separating them. I fought in 20 campaigns, survived torture, starvation, injuries that should have killed me. But when you commanded us to stop, I couldn't even think about resisting. It was like my own will just vanished. Elira wrote, I made surrender the only logical option. That's not logic, that's domination. But the officer didn't sound angry, just awed. I've been conquered before. Had to yield to superior force. This was different. You didn't defeat us. You just made fighting cease to exist as a possibility. Elira didn't know how to explain that it had nearly killed her to do it, that the power had come at a cost she'd be paying for the rest of her life. So she just nodded. Not everyone who visited was friendly. On the afternoon of the second day, a delegation from the Traditionalist Council faction arrived. 3 stern-faced alphas who looked at Elira like she was a disease they were trying to diagnose. We need to understand what you are, their leader said without preamble. What you did violates every principle of honorable combat. Mind control is forbidden under the old codes, has been for centuries. Elira wrote, I saved your city. You use dark magic to subvert free will. That's not salvation, it's tyranny. The Alpha's voice was hard. What's to stop you from doing the same thing to Varkros? From commanding our warriors to kneel, our leaders to surrender? Nothing, Elira wrote, except that I don't want to. Forgive us if we don't find that reassuring. You exiled me to die. I came back and saved you anyway. That should count for something. Or it means you're planning something worse. The Alpha leaned closer. Power like yours needs to be controlled, contained, preferably eliminated. One of his companions put a restraining hand on his arm. Careful. Threatening her now would be unwise. The people are watching. The people are fools if they trust her. But he backed off. The hearing will determine your fate, exile. I suggest you use the time to consider whether Varkros is worth the risk you represent. They left in a cloud of hostile silence. Corvina appeared moments later, having clearly been listening outside. That went poorly. Elira wrote, They want me dead. Not dead, controlled, which to people like them is the same thing. Corvina settled into her usual chair. You represent everything they fear. Power that doesn't come from dominance, strength that doesn't require violence, change they can't prevent. Can I win at the hearing? Honestly, I don't know. Corvina's admission was jarring. You have popular support. The common people love you, but the council is made up of alphas who've spent their lives believing might makes right. Convincing them that your way is valid will be nearly impossible. Then what do I do? Corvina's smile was sharp. You remind them that legends don't ask for permission. They just are. The hearing convened in the Great Hall on the 4th day after the battle. Elira could walk now, though every step was agony. Her hands were still bandaged, but the healers had managed to restore enough function that she could grip things clumsily. Her voice was gone completely, not even whispers anymore, just painful rasping that accomplished nothing. They'd given her formal clothes for the occasion. Not ceremonial white like the moon rite, but deep gray lined with silver thread. Corvina had chosen them specifically. You're not a supplicant, she'd said. You're not asking for their approval. You're simply existing in their space while they decide whether to acknowledge reality. The Great Hall was packed. The council sat in a semicircle at the far end. 12 alphas, including Torvin and Kaelin, all wearing their formal regalia. Behind them, rows of witnesses filled the chamber. Elira spotted coalition commanders under guard, Varkros citizens who'd requested permission to attend, even some of her former reserve fighters looking uncertain and out of place among the crowd. Corvina walked beside her, providing support when Elira's legs threatened to give out. They reached the center of the hall and stopped. Torvin stood, his alpha presence rolling out like a wave. We convene to determine the fate of Elira, formerly exiled, currently under question for use of forbidden magic in defense of Varkros. His voice carried across the chamber with practiced authority. The charges are as follows. There are no charges, Corvina interrupted, her ancient voice cutting through his speech like a knife. You can't charge someone with saving your lives. This is a hearing, not a trial. Torvin's jaw tightened. Semantics. Law, which you're bound to uphold as alpha. Corvina's smile was dangerous. Or have we abandoned all pretense of civilization? Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Torvin looked like he wanted to argue, but couldn't without appearing petty. Fine. A hearing. He gestured to Elira. Can she even respond to questions without her voice? Corvina produced a slate and chalk, handing them to Elira. She'll write her answers. Unless you're illiterate? More murmurs, some containing laughter. The hearing began. For the first hour, they rehashed the battle. Coalition commanders testified that they'd been under mental compulsion, unable to resist. Varkros defenders testified that they'd witnessed Elira holding 2,000 fighters immobile through force of will alone. The facts weren't in dispute. The interpretation was, what you did was an abomination, one council member stated flatly. Stripping away free will is the act of a tyrant, not a savior. Elira wrote, I gave them the choice to surrender. They chose to invade instead. I simply enforced consequences. You removed their ability to choose. I removed their ability to kill my people. That's called defense. Through methods that violate every code of honorable combat. Elira's chalk scraped hard across the slate. Honor doesn't feed starving civilians, doesn't rebuild burned homes, doesn't bring back the dead from your honorable battles. I saved lives. That's what matters. What matters, another council member interjected, is whether we can trust you. You hold power that no one can defend against. Power you demonstrated by conquering 2,000 minds simultaneously. What's to prevent you from doing the same to us? The question hung in the air. Elira stared at the slate, choosing her words carefully. Finally, she wrote, "Nothing prevents me except choice. The same choice you're demanding I respect in others. I choose not to dominate you, but you need to understand, the ability to do something doesn't create the obligation to do it." "Philosophical nonsense," Torvin said dismissively. "You're asking us to trust your restraint when you've demonstrated no restraint in using your power." "I demonstrated restraint by not using it until you were about to lose everything. I lived in exile for months, trained in secret, came back only when necessary. That's the definition of restraint." "Or careful planning," another alpha suggested. "Building power until you could strike decisively." Elira's frustration was mounting. They were twisting everything, looking for threats where none existed. She wrote furiously, "If I wanted to conquer Varkros, I would have done it already. The Binding Stone is 3 miles from here. I could reach it before you could stop me. Could command every person in this city to kneel. Could make myself ruler by sunset. But I'm not doing that. I'm standing here, unarmed and injured, letting you debate my fate. Doesn't that tell you something about my intentions?" Silence. Then Kaelin stood. "It tells me," he said quietly, "that we're judging her by standards we don't apply to ourselves." Torvin's head snapped toward his son. "Sit down." "No." Kaelin's voice was steady. "I need to say this." He turned to address the full council. "We've built our entire society on the principle that might makes right. That alphas rule because we're stronger, more dominant, more capable of violence than anyone else. We don't ask permission to lead. We take authority through superior force and call it natural order." "That's different," someone started. "How?" Kaelin challenged. "How is it different? Elira has superior force, just a different kind than we're used to. She could dominate us exactly the way we dominate everyone beneath us in the hierarchy, but she's choosing not to. She's asking for recognition instead of taking it." He paused. "We should be grateful, because if she were truly like us, we'd all be kneeling right now and she'd be sitting where my father sits." Torvin looked like he'd been slapped. "You're defending her?" "I'm stating facts." Kaelin met his father's eyes. "She saved Varkros when our conventional strength failed. She did it at tremendous personal cost. Look at her hands, listen to her silence. She gave up her voice and possibly her future to protect people who exiled her to die." His voice hardened. "And our response is to debate whether she's too dangerous to live? We should be ashamed." The hall erupted in argument. Some council members shouting agreement, others demanding Kaelin be removed for bias. Torvin trying to restore order with alpha presence that Kaelin simply ignored. Corvina let it play out for a minute before intervening. "Enough!" Her voice, not amplified by the stone but carrying decades of first voice training, cut through the chaos like a blade. Everyone fell silent. "You want to know if she's dangerous?" Corvina continued into the quiet. "Of course she is. Power is always dangerous. But so is weakness. So is ignorance. So is clinging to old ways when the world is changing." She turned to address the council directly. "The first voices ruled for 800 years without the constant warfare that's defined the last 3 centuries. They maintained peace through strength, yes, but also through wisdom. Through understanding that power unused is often more effective than power deployed." "That age is dead," Torvin said flatly. "Is it?" Corvina gestured to Elira. "Because it looks very alive to me. This girl represents a bridge between what we were and what we could become. A chance to integrate first voice wisdom with alpha strength, to create something better than either tradition alone." She paused. "Or you can kill that possibility because it scares you. Your choice." The council members exchanged glances. Elira could see the calculation happening, weighing risk against opportunity, fear against necessity. Finally, one of the older alphas spoke. Not hostile, but not friendly either. Cautious. What do you want, girl? If we let you stay, what's your endgame? Alira wrote slowly, making sure every word was clear. I want to help Varkros become stronger, not through more violence, but through better strategy. I want to train others to resist mental compulsion so what I did can never be used against us. I want to be part of rebuilding what the war destroyed. I want a place that isn't defined by being unwanted. That's all? That's everything. Another silence. Then Kaelin spoke again. I propose we create a new position, advisor to the Alpha on unconventional warfare, someone whose role is specifically to think differently than our traditional commanders. He looked at Alira. Someone who's proven they can win battles without bloodshed. You want to give her official authority? Torvin's voice was incredulous. I want to acknowledge the reality that she already has power. Making it official just means we're being honest about it. Kaelin's expression was calm. And it gives her a reason to stay loyal, to invest in Varkros' success rather than just her own survival. The council erupted in fresh argument, but this time, Alira noticed, the tone was different. Less about whether she should exist, more about what form that existence should take. They were negotiating, not condemning. It was progress. The debate lasted another 2 hours. Compromise proposals were offered and rejected. Restrictions suggested and amended. Through it all, Alira stood silently, letting them exhaust themselves arguing about her future. Finally, Torvin called for a vote. All in favor of exile, raise your hands. 3 hands went up, less than Alira expected. All in favor of offering formal position with restrictions. 7 hands, including, after a long hesitation, Torvin's. 2 abstentions, Torvin noted. The motion carries. He looked at Alira, his expression complicated. You'll serve as advisor on unconventional defense, answerable to the Alpha and Council. You'll train our forces in resistance to mental compulsion. You'll submit to regular evaluations of your activities, and you'll swear an oath to use your abilities only in Varkros' defense. Alira wrote, I accept. Then kneel. For a heartbeat, Alira considered refusing. The symbolism was too pointed, making her kneel again after everything. But Corvina touched her arm gently. Pick your battles, the gesture said. Alira knelt, awkward with her damaged hands. Torvin approached, placing his hand on her head in the traditional gesture of authority. I bind you to Varkros in service and honor. Rise as advisor, Alira. She rose. The title felt strange, foreign, but real. The hall erupted in mixed reaction. Some applause, some grumbling, general chaos as people processed what had just happened. Corvina leaned close to whisper, Welcome back. Officially this time? Kaelin was suddenly there, offering his hand before remembering her injuries. He pulled back awkwardly. I'm sorry for everything. For the rejection, the exile. The months you spent suffering while I was too proud to admit I was wrong. Alira studied him for a long moment. Then she wrote on her slate, showing it to him alone. Apology noted. Forgiveness pending. But we can start with this. He smiled, genuine and relieved. That's more than I deserve. Probably. But I'm tired of carrying anger. It's heavy. Then let me help carry whatever comes next, Kaelin said quietly. As allies, if nothing else. Alira nodded. Allies. It was a start. As the crowd dispersed and people came to offer congratulations or thinly veiled threats, Alira felt something settle in her chest. Not peace exactly, not happiness, but maybe possibility. She'd survived the frontier, survived the rejection, survived the stone itself. Now she'd survived politics. And for the first time since the moonrite shattered her world, Alira had something she'd lost that night in the amphitheater. A future that belonged to her. A future that belonged to her turned out to be more complicated than Alira anticipated. The first month in her new role was an exercise in frustration. The council had given her a title and vague authority, but no actual resources. No office, no staff, no budget. Just expectations that she'd somehow transform Varkros' defense strategy while recovering from injuries that should have killed her. They're testing you, Corvina explained one afternoon, watching Alira struggle to write training protocols with hands that still barely functioned. Seeing if you'll fail on your own so they don't have to actively remove you. Alira scrawled. That's encouraging. It's realistic. You're asking people to fundamentally change how they think about power and conflict. That doesn't happen overnight. Corvina paused. Though we might be able to speed things along. How? Show them what you can do, not through demonstrations. They've seen that. Through results. Corvina's smile was sharp. The coalition prisoners are still here, hundreds of them. Most refuse to cooperate with interrogation. What if you could make them willing participants instead? Alira hesitated. The idea of using her abilities on prisoners felt wrong, like proving the council's fears correct. Not compulsion, Corvina clarified, reading her expression. Persuasion. There's a difference. You make cooperation appealing rather than inevitable. Show them a path forward that benefits everyone. Can I even do that without my voice? You have other tools now. You've been working with the healers on projection techniques. Time to put them to practical use. The next day, Alira requested permission to interview coalition prisoners. The council granted it reluctantly, but assigned guards to watch her every move. Insurance against exactly the kind of mental manipulation they feared. The first prisoner they brought was a woman named Kara, mid-30s, with scars suggesting extensive combat experience. She'd been one of the coalition's tactical officers, captured during the surrender. Refused to speak for weeks despite various inducements. Alira sat across from her in the interrogation room, slate and chalk ready. The guard stood by the door, weapons drawn but lowered. For a long moment, neither woman moved. Then Alira wrote, "I'm not here to force anything from you." Kara's eyes narrowed. "Then why are you here?" Alira's heart jumped. First words Kara had spoken to anyone, progress already, to understand why you fought, what you hoped to achieve. What does it matter? We lost. You surrendered. Different from losing. Alira chose her words carefully. Losing means destruction. You're all still alive, still have futures. I want to know what those futures could look like. Kara laughed bitterly. Futures in prison? Some gift? Only if that's what we choose. Alira leaned forward slightly. The war is over. The coalition can't win. But neither can Varkros truly win if we're holding hundreds of prisoners indefinitely. We need a different solution. Like what? Like understanding what your people actually need. The resources you were fighting for. The territories you wanted. Maybe there's a way to address those needs without more bloodshed. You can't negotiate from a position of... Kara stopped herself. You're the one who did it, who held all of us frozen. Alira nodded. I thought I was dying, Kara said quietly. My mind was screaming to move, to fight, to do anything. But my body just stopped. Like someone reached into my skull and flipped a switch. She met Alira's eyes. That was you? Another nod. How? Alira wrote, Does it matter? The question isn't how I did it. It's what we do now that it's done. What do you want from me? Information. About the coalition's actual grievances. Not the political rhetoric, but the real problems driving ordinary people to war. Alira paused before adding, And in exchange, I'll advocate for your release. Under conditions, but release. Kara stared at her. You can do that? I can try. I'm advisor to the Alpha now. Means my recommendations carry weight. Alira allowed herself a slight smile despite the pain in her damaged hands. Whether they listen is another question. But I'm willing to fight for it if you're willing to help me understand what peace actually requires. The conversation lasted 3 hours. By the end, Kara had given Alira detailed information about the coalition's formation, how border disputes and resource scarcity had pushed eastern territories into alliance, how Varkros's expansion under Torven had seemed like existential threat, how the war had been about survival, not conquest. More importantly, she'd given Alira names. Coalition leaders who might be open to genuine negotiation if the terms weren't punitive. This could actually work, Kara said, as guards prepared to escort her back to holding. If you can convince your council to think long-term instead of just grinding us under their boots. That's the hard part, Alira wrote. But I'm familiar with hard. Over the next 2 weeks, Alira interviewed 20 more prisoners using the same approach. Not all cooperated, but enough did that she began assembling a comprehensive picture of what sustainable peace might require. Territory concessions, trade agreements, formal recognition of coalition sovereignty, things that would make the Varkros Council furious, but might actually prevent the next war. She compiled everything into a detailed proposal, working late into the nights despite hands that cramped and bled from extended writing. Corvina helped refine the language, making it palatable to alpha sensibilities without diluting the core message. When Elira finally presented it to the council, the reaction was exactly what she expected. "You want us to give up territory we won?" One council member's voice was incredulous. "Reward the coalition for invading us?" Elira wrote quickly, "I want you to prevent them from invading again in 5 years when they're desperate and organized. This isn't reward, it's investment in stability." "Stability through weakness," Torvin said dismissively. "If we concede now, every border territory will think they can challenge us. If you crush them completely, every border territory will unite against you as a common threat. You'll face not one coalition, but 5. Elira's chalk scraped hard across the slate. "I gave you military victory. This is how you turn it into lasting peace. And if we refuse, then you waste the lives I saved. Prove that Varkros learned nothing from nearly losing everything." The tension in the council chamber was thick enough to cut. Several members looked intrigued despite themselves. Others appeared ready to reject the proposal purely on principle. Kalen broke the stalemate. "We should at least open negotiations," he said carefully. "Hear what the coalition is willing to accept. Elira's proposal gives us a starting position. We can adjust from there." "You're supporting her again," Torvin observed coldly. "I'm supporting not being at war for the next decade." Kalen met his father's eyes steadily. "She's right that crushing them completely just creates the next conflict. We have an opportunity here to actually change the pattern." The debate raged for 2 more hours, but eventually, grudgingly, the council voted to authorize exploratory negotiations with coalition leadership. Elira would participate as technical advisor. It was another small victory, another step forward. Outside the council chamber, Kalen caught up with her. "You're good at this," he said. "The political maneuvering. I didn't expect that." Elira wrote, "I learned from watching you, though I try to be less arrogant about it." He laughed. "Fair. I deserved that." His expression grew more serious. "How are your hands? Really?" "Functional, painful, getting better slowly." "And your voice?" "Gone. The healers confirmed it's permanent." Elira paused before adding, "I'm learning to work around it. Turns out you don't need speech to make people listen." "No, you just need to save their entire city from destruction." Kalen's voice carried something that might have been admiration. "For what it's worth, I think you're doing important work, changing how Varkros thinks about strength and conflict. It matters. Coming from the heir who once called me worthless, that's almost meaningful." "I know. I'm working on being less terrible." He smiled slightly. "Think there's a future where we're actual friends? Not just political allies?" Elira considered the question honestly. The rejection still hurt, probably always would. But Kalen had changed, genuinely, visibly. He'd stood up for her repeatedly, risked his own standing to give her opportunities. That counted for something. "Maybe," she wrote. "Ask me again in a year when I'm not still angry." "That's fair." He hesitated, then added, "The moonrite bond we severed, I know it's gone, but I wanted to say that I'm glad you survived to become who you are now. Even if that person wants nothing to do with me romantically, which I completely understand. Stop apologizing. You can't undo the past by drowning in guilt." Elira's writing was firm. "Be better going forward. That's all anyone can ask." He nodded, looking relieved and grateful in equal measure. As he left, Corvina appeared from the shadows where she'd clearly been lurking. "You're softening toward him," she observed. "I'm getting tired of carrying grudges. They're exhausting." "Wise. Though don't forgive too easily. He still needs to earn it." Corvina settled beside her. "Speaking of which, I have a proposal for you." "Another one?" "The binding stone. It's still out there, unguarded and vulnerable. Eventually someone will find it, try to use it." Corvina's expression was grave. "We need to either destroy it or protect it. And I think you're the only person who can make that decision." The thought of going back to the stone made Elira's hands throb in phantom pain. She never wanted to see that black rock again. Never wanted to feel that terrible power flowing through her. But Corvina was right. Leaving it accessible was irresponsible. "When?" "Tomorrow, while you still have the authority and the council's tentative trust." Corvina paused. and while you're still strong enough to do what needs to be done. They reached the stone at dawn, accompanied by a small group including Kaelin, 2 council members, and several guards. The trek up the northeast ridge was harder than Alira remembered. Her body was still healing, still weak from the damage the stone had inflicted. The black rock stood exactly as she'd left it, patient and ancient and utterly indifferent to human suffering. Looking at it made Alira's stomach turn. "So what's the plan?" one of the council members asked. "You're going to destroy it?" Alira approached slowly, every step requiring conscious effort. She placed her damaged hands on the stone's surface. The connection was immediate but different than before, gentler. The stone recognized her, welcomed her like an old acquaintance. Power hummed just beneath the surface, waiting to be channeled. She could feel the temptation. How easy it would be to tap into that amplification again, to command with absolute authority, to never be questioned or doubted because her voice, if she had it, would make dissent impossible. That was the real danger, not the physical damage, the corruption. Alira pulled her hands back and wrote on her slate, "We can't destroy it." The first voices built these to last millennia. Any attempt would likely fail and possibly trigger catastrophic feedback. Then what? Kaelin asked. "We seal it. Make it inaccessible except under extreme circumstances." Alira gestured to the surrounding area. "Bury it properly. Set wards that only first voice descendants can break. Make it so using this power requires conscious choice, not desperation." "You're proposing to lock away a weapon that could defend Varkros from any threat?" The council member looked incredulous. "I'm proposing we don't rely on weapons that destroy the wielder." Alira's writing was emphatic. "I survived using this once. Barely. No one should have to make that choice again." "But what if we need it? What if another invasion? Then you'll have to fight conventionally, like everyone else." Alira met his eyes steadily. Some powers are too dangerous to keep accessible. This is one of them. The debate continued, but Alira remained firm. Eventually, Corvina intervened, pointing out that Alira was the only person with actual experience using the stone. Her recommendation carried weight. They spent the rest of the day sealing the site. Corvina wove first voice wards into the rubble pile they built over the stone, protections that would make the site virtually invisible to anyone not specifically looking for it with the right training. Alira added her own touch, a compulsion woven into the wards that made people naturally avoid the area. By sunset, the binding stone was buried again, protected, removed from easy access. "You're giving up tremendous power," Kaelin observed as they descended the ridge. "I'm choosing not to rely on it," Alira corrected via slate. "There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes. Giving up means you had no choice. I'm choosing to walk away from something that nearly killed me because some prices are too high. Even if it means being less powerful, especially then. The stone made me powerful, but it didn't make me strong." Alira paused to rest, her legs shaking from the climb. Strength is doing the right thing when you have other options. Power is just noise. Kaelin was quiet for a moment. "You've changed a lot from the girl at the moon rite. That girl died in the frontier. I'm what grew in the space she left behind." "I like what grew." Alira managed a tired smile. "You're still not forgiven?" "I know, but I'm working on it." The negotiations with the coalition took 3 months. They were contentious, exhausting, and frequently on the verge of collapse. But Alira kept pushing, kept mediating, kept finding compromises that both sides could stomach. Her inability to speak actually helped. It forced everyone to slow down, to write things out, to think before responding. By the time leaves started falling, they had the framework of a treaty. Territory concessions balanced by trade agreements. Mutual defense pacts, formal recognition of borders. It wasn't perfect, but it was workable. The council ratified it with minimal grumbling. Even Torvin admitted it was better than eternal war, though he looked like the words physically pained him. Coalition prisoners were released in stages, with guarantees of safe passage home. Kara was among the first, leaving with a respectful nod toward Alira. "You kept your word," she said simply. "That's rare." "So is peace," Alira wrote. "Let's try not to waste it." Agreed. As autumn deepened, Varkros began the slow process of rebuilding. Damaged buildings were repaired. Refugees returned to their homes. The constant tension of wartime gradually eased into something approaching normalcy. Illyra's role evolved. She wasn't just advising on defense anymore. She was training a new generation of fighters in mental resistance techniques, teaching them to recognize and counter compulsion attempts, making sure what she'd done to the Coalition could never be done to Varkros. Her students were initially skeptical. Hard to take seriously someone who couldn't speak and whose hands shook with basic movements. But after the first demonstration, where Illyra used projection techniques to make half the class freeze mid-combat drill, they paid attention. "How did you do that without speaking?" one young fighter asked, awed. Illyra wrote, "Will doesn't require words. Words just make it easier. But if you're strong enough, intention alone can reshape reality. Can you teach us that?" "I can teach you to resist it. That's more important." The training was harsh but effective. Within 2 months, her students could shake off minor compulsions. Within 4, they could resist moderate ones. None of them would ever match Illyra's power. That required first voice lineage. But they could defend against it, which was the point. One evening, 6 months after the treaty signing, Corvina found Illyra in the training yard after everyone else had left. "You've built something good here," the old woman observed, watching Illyra practice grip-strengthening exercises that still left her hands bleeding. "A legacy beyond just winning battles. It's not a legacy yet, just a beginning." "Beginnings are how legacies start." Corvina settled onto a bench. "I wanted to tell you something about the Moonrite rejection." Illyra's hands stilled. "I was there presiding when Kaelin severed the bond. It was the first time in 300 years anyone had refused a destined mate." Corvina's expression was distant. "I was furious. Not just at him, at myself. Because I knew what you were. Recognized the first voice potential in you even if you didn't. And I did nothing to stop your exile." "Why not?" "Because I was a coward, afraid of challenging alpha authority, afraid of revealing knowledge I'd kept hidden for decades." Corvina met her eyes. "I let you walk into the frontier expecting to die because speaking up would have exposed too much. I'm sorry for that." Illyra considered the apology. Corvina had helped her survive and grow stronger, had given her the tools to save Varkros, but she'd also let Illyra be exiled without protest. Finally, she wrote, "You made a choice you regret. I understand that, but you also gave me the knowledge that saved my life. So maybe it balances." "Does it?" "No. But I'm choosing to accept it anyway, because holding on to anger at everyone who failed me would leave no room for anything else." "When did you get so wise?" "When I stopped having the energy to stay bitter." Illyra managed a slight smile. "Turns out survival requires letting some things go." "That's very mature of you. Don't tell anyone. I have a reputation as scary to maintain." Corvina laughed, the sound genuine and warm. As winter approached, Kaelin began preparing for his formal ascension to Alpha. Torvin was stepping down, not because of failure, but because he was tired. The war had aged him drastically. He wanted rest. "Will you be there?" Kaelin asked Illyra one afternoon. "At the ceremony? Do I have a choice?" "Always. But I'd like you there. You're part of what Varkros is becoming. Should be recognized for it." "I don't need recognition." "Maybe not. But you deserve it anyway." Kaelin paused. "I'm going to make changes. Move away from pure dominance hierarchies. Create space for different kinds of strength. Your way of doing things." He met her eyes. "I learned that from you. From watching you survive and thrive despite everything we did to break you." "We?" "I was the one who rejected you, but the whole system enabled it. Made it acceptable to throw away anyone who didn't fit the narrow definition of worthy." His voice was quiet. "I want to change that. Make Varkros better." "That's ambitious." "So was surviving the frontier, so was saving the city with methods everyone said were impossible." Kaelin smiled. "I figure if you can do the impossible, the least I can do is try for the merely difficult." The ascension ceremony took place on the winter solstice. The same amphitheater where Illyra had been rejected now hosted Kaelin's coronation as Alpha. Illyra sat in a position of honor, between Corvina and the captain of her defense training program. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Kaelin's speech was shorter than traditional. He talked about strength taking many forms, about learning from mistakes, about building a Varkros that valued wisdom alongside dominance. Several council members looked uncomfortable, but the younger generation, the ones who'd grown up during the war, who'd seen Elira save them, looked hopeful. After the ceremony, people approached Elira to offer congratulations and thanks. Some genuine, some obligatory, all part of the careful dance of politics she'd learned to navigate. One person who approached genuinely surprised her, Mira, her aunt. The woman who'd raised her after her parents died, who'd always made clear how disappointing Elira was. "I owe you an apology," Mira said without preamble. Elira wrote, "For what specifically?" "There's a long list. For all of it. For making you feel worthless. For not defending you at the rejection. For letting you walk into exile without protest." Mira's voice was steady, but her eyes were wet. "I was wrong about you. About what strength looks like. About everything." "Yes, you were. I don't expect forgiveness. But I wanted you to know that I see now what you became. Who you always had the potential to be if people had supported instead of crushed you." She paused. "I'm proud of you. I should have said that years ago." Elira stared at her aunt, feeling emotions she couldn't quite name. Anger, yes, but also something softer. Something that might have been the beginning of closure. "I can't forgive you yet," she wrote honestly. "Maybe not ever. What you did shaped who I became, but that doesn't make it right. I understand, but I can acknowledge the apology, and maybe that's enough for now." Mira nodded, looking relieved and sad in equal measure. She left without pressing for more. "That was generous," Corvina observed. "It was honest," Elira corrected. "I'm tired of pretending things hurt less than they do, but also tired of letting old hurts define my present. That's called healing. It's called exhaustion. But I'll accept the optimistic interpretation." As the celebration continued around them, Elira found herself on a balcony overlooking Varkros. The city spread below, lights beginning to flicker on as darkness fell. Somewhere down there, her students were probably training. The coalition representatives were settling into their new embassy. Former enemies were becoming neighbors. It wasn't perfect. Probably never would be. But it was better. Kaelin joined her, now wearing the Alpha's formal regalia. "Looks good on you," Elira wrote, gesturing at the ceremonial coat. "Feels heavy." He leaned against the railing beside her. "I keep thinking about the moon rite, about standing in that amphitheater and destroying our bond because I was too arrogant to see past surface strength." Ancient history. "Is it? Because I still regret it. Wonder what would have happened if I'd been smarter, less afraid of appearing weak." Elira considered the question honestly. Wrote carefully, "If you'd accepted the bond, I might have stayed weak. Stayed in the role everyone expected. The rejection broke me, but it also freed me to become something else. Something stronger than that scared girl could have imagined." "So you're saying my arrogance accidentally did you a favor?" "I'm saying that sometimes the worst things that happen to us crack us open enough to grow into something better." Elira paused. "Doesn't make what you did right, but it makes what I became mine. That's a very healthy perspective. It's the only perspective that lets me sleep at night." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city transition into evening. After a while, Kaelin spoke again. "The bond we severed, it's gone permanently. But I've been thinking, what if we built something new? Not a mate bond, but a partnership. Alpha and Advisor working together to reshape Varkros into something better than what we inherited." Elira's heart did something complicated. Part of her wanted to refuse on principle, but another part recognized the offer for what it was: genuine partnership between equals. Not romance, not obligation, but mutual respect forged through shared struggle. On one condition, she wrote, "Name it. You never call me weak again, even as a joke, even in private. That word doesn't get to touch me anymore." "Never," Kaelin agreed immediately. "You're the strongest person I know, in every way that actually matters." "Then we have a deal." Elira offered her damaged hand, scars visible even in the fading light. Kaelin took it carefully, mindful of her injuries. His grip was warm and steady. "Partners," he said. "Partners," she wrote with her free hand. I am mundane." 3 years later, Elira stood in the same training yard where she'd once struggled to make a rock move. Her students, now numbering over 100, practice mental resistance drills with the discipline of career fighters. Her hands had healed enough to demonstrate techniques, though they'd never be what they were before the stone. Her voice was still gone, but she'd developed a sign language system that her students learned as part of their training. Varkros had changed, slowly, frustratingly, but genuinely. The rigid dominance hierarchy was giving way to something more flexible. First voice techniques were being integrated alongside traditional alpha training. Conflicts were being resolved through negotiation before escalating to violence. It wasn't perfect. There were still alphas who resented the changes, still people who thought Alira's methods were weak. But they were outnumbered now by those who'd seen what happened when different kinds of strength worked together. The treaty with the coalition had held, trade flourished, the borders were peaceful. It turned out that when people weren't fighting for survival, they had energy for building instead of destroying. Corvina visited less frequently now, her age finally catching up with her. But when she did, she'd watch the training with satisfaction. "You've created something that will outlast both of us," she observed during one visit. Alira signed. That was the goal. Power that dies with one person isn't power, it's tyranny. Speaking of power, Corvina pulled out a letter. "The Western Territories have heard about your training program. They want to send students, learn your techniques. That's a long way to travel. They're offering to pay, handsomely." Corvina's expression was sly. "And they're asking if you'd consider visiting their territory, teaching their leaders about conflict resolution through methods other than violence." Alira felt something stir in her chest, not ambition exactly, but possibility. What she'd built in Varkros could spread, could change how entire regions thought about strength and survival. "Kalen would have to approve my leaving." "Already asked. He said it's your decision, though he'd miss having you around." Over the past 3 years, Alira and Kalen had built something unexpected. Not romance, that ship had burned and sunk, but genuine friendship. They challenged each other, supported each other, occasionally infuriated each other. It worked. "Tell them I'll consider it," Alira signed. "But I need time to train my replacement here first. This program can't depend on me." Already thinking about succession, "You really have changed from that girl who thought she had to do everything alone. That girl didn't survive. I'm what learned from her mistakes." That night, Alira walked through Varkros' streets alone. Past the amphitheater where she'd been rejected, now used for cultural events instead of just ceremonies. Past the archives where she'd once worked in obscurity. Past the gates she'd been exiled through. Everything looked different now, or maybe she looked at it differently. She ended up at the plaza where the coalition had surrendered. A memorial stood there now, not celebrating victory, but honoring the fact that peace was possible. Alira's name was on it, alongside the names of fighters who'd died in previous battles. A reminder that survival required sacrifice, but also that sacrifice should mean something. "Still can't believe you turned this place around." Alira turned to find one of her original reserve fighters, a young woman named Sarah, who'd been in that first desperate defense of the granaries. "I mean, we were supposed to die that day," Sarah continued. "Cannon fodder, disposable. Then you showed up and made us matter, made us part of something that actually changed things." Alira signed. "You always mattered. I just helped you see it. That's not how it felt at the time. But I'll take the optimistic revision." Sarah smiled. "I'm putting in for advanced training. Want to become an instructor like you. Teach the next generation. You'd be good at it." "Think so?" "I know so. You survived being dismissed and came out stronger. That's exactly what students need to see." After Sarah left, Alira sat on a bench in the plaza and let herself feel the weight of the past 3 years. The struggle, the victories, the losses, the slow, grinding work of changing minds and systems. It had cost her. Her voice, full use of her hands, pieces of her mind that the stone had burned away and would never regenerate. Relationships that couldn't be repaired. Innocence about how power worked and what people were capable of. But she'd gained more than she'd lost. Purpose. Community. The knowledge that she was strong in ways that mattered. The satisfaction of building something that would outlast her physical limitations. And most importantly, she belonged now. Not because someone granted her permission, but because she'd carved out a place through competence and courage and stubborn refusal to stay broken. Kalen found her there an hour later. "Thought I'd find you here," he said, settling onto the bench beside her. Corvina told me about the Western Territories offer. Alira signed, I haven't decided yet. You should go. What you're doing is too important to stay contained in Varkros. Other places need this. You want to get rid of me? I want you to spread what you've built. Make it bigger than one city. Kaelin smiled. Besides, you'll come back. You always do. That confident? You survived exile, the frontier, the binding stone, and politics. At this point, I'm convinced you're unkillable. Alira laughed, a silent, shaking gesture that still felt good despite the lack of sound. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the city move around them. Varkros at peace. Varkros changing. Varkros becoming something better than what it had been. Do you ever regret it? Kaelin asked quietly. Everything you gave up to get here? Alira considered the question honestly. Thought about her voice, her hands, the pieces of herself burned away by power too great for flesh to hold. Then she thought about her students, the peace treaty, the changes rippling through Varkros' culture, the fact that exile was no longer a death sentence because she'd survived it and proven there were other paths. She signed, Regret suggests I'd choose differently. I wouldn't. Every scar I carry means something, means I survived when I wasn't supposed to, means I built something from the ruins they tried to bury me in. That's not really an answer. It's the only answer I have. Alira's signs were emphatic. I'm not the girl from the Moonrite. That person died in the frontier. I'm what grew in the space she left behind, and I like what I became. Even without your voice? Especially without it. Turns out you don't need to speak to be heard. You just need to be worth listening to. Kaelin was quiet for a long moment. I'm glad you survived. Glad you came back. Glad you were stronger than my worst mistake. Me too. They stood preparing to return to their respective duties. Kaelin paused, then spoke carefully. If I could go back to that Moonrite, knowing everything I know now, I'd still reject you. Alira's hands froze mid-sign. Not because you were weak, he continued quickly, but because you needed to be freed from who they expected you to be. And I needed to learn that my definition of strength was incomplete. He met her eyes. The rejection destroyed us both in different ways. But maybe we needed to be destroyed to become who we are now. Alira considered this. It was twisted logic, justifying cruelty as necessary catalyst. But it was also honest. They were both better people now than they'd been that night, just not in ways that could have happened without breaking first. She signed, That's a very convenient way to rationalize trauma. Is it wrong, though? No, just uncomfortable. Alira paused. But I'll accept it, because the alternative is believing I suffered for nothing, and I refuse to give my pain that power. Fair enough. As they walked back toward the council hall together, Alpha and Advisor, former enemies who'd become something more complicated than friends but less simple than allies, Alira felt something settle in her chest. Not happiness exactly, not contentment, but something close to peace. She'd been rejected, exiled, nearly killed multiple times, had lost parts of herself that would never regenerate, but she'd also discovered strength no one knew she had saved a city that tried to destroy her, had built a legacy that would outlast her physical limitations. And most importantly, she'd proven that the weak girl they'd dismissed was never weak at all. She'd just been waiting for the right moment to show them what strength actually meant. The moon rose over Varkros full and bright. 3 years ago, it had witnessed her rejection. Tonight, it witnessed her triumph. Not through revenge, but through becoming someone whose existence made revenge unnecessary. Alira looked up at it and smiled. The moon didn't make mistakes, Corvina had said. And standing here, whole despite the scars, powerful despite the limitations, heard despite the silence, Alira finally believed it. The girl who'd knelt in the amphitheater was gone, burned away like morning mist. In her place stood a woman who'd survived the unsurvivable and turned suffering into strength, who'd been rejected and returned as someone they couldn't reject again, who'd proven that the only person who could define her worth was herself. And that, Alira thought, was the greatest power of all.